Elden Ring has well over 150 bosses scattered across its massive open world, and buried inside nearly every single one of them are hidden secrets, lore details, and design choices that the overwhelming majority of players have simply never noticed. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So this video took a really long time to put together. I've been sitting with Elden Ring for years at this point, going back through item descriptions, re-watching boss cutscenes frame by frame, and cross-referencing lore notes that the community has been building since the game launched. When I started assembling this list, I had to make some choices. I leaned toward details that actually changed how I understood a boss, rather than just trivia for its own sake. I also made the deliberate decision to include Shadow of the Erdtree bosses, because honestly, some of the most layered secrets in the entire game are sitting in that DLC, and they don't get talked about nearly enough. A few entries here are genuinely debated in the lore community, and when that's the case, I'll flag it. Everything I present is one possible reading of the evidence, not a definitive answer. Alright, let's get into it. Easter Egg 1, Margit the Fell Omen and the Cane That Should Not Exist. Margit the Fell Omen is the first major boss most players encounter in Elden Ring, and he already has more going on beneath the surface than almost anything else in the early game. The first thing worth noticing is his walking cane. Margit hobbles into the arena leaning on it, and it feels like a character detail, something to suggest age or theatricality. But look at it more carefully. That cane is not just a prop, it is a weapon in its own right, and more importantly, the shape and glow of it suggests it is made of Golden Order magic, conjured on the spot rather than carried in. Margit is not a frail old figure who needs support. He is a supremely powerful Omen Lord who has chosen to present himself as something weaker and more decrepit than he actually is. The cane is a performance. It suggests Margit approaches the Tarnished with a kind of condescension, as if to say he is so confident in the outcome of this fight that he will not even begin in earnest. He toys with you, and the walking stick is the first visual signal of that arrogance. It is a remarkably economical piece of character design that tells you everything about his attitude before he swings a single weapon. Easter Egg 2, Margit's second phase knives. When Margit enters his second phase, he begins summoning golden phantom daggers and hammers into the air before hurling them. These weapons are entirely conjured from holy energy, and they hover in the air with a particular patience before they come crashing down. What is easy to miss here is that these conjured weapons share a visual language with the armaments used by the Two Fingers and their associated servants. The gold-white glow, the specific shape of the daggers, and the way they materialize out of nothing all point toward the same power source that the Golden Order's higher agents use. One possible reading of this is that Margit, despite being an omen and therefore someone who should have been cast out and rejected by the Golden Order's ideals, has somehow acquired or absorbed power that originates with the Two Fingers themselves. This would be deeply ironic, and it connects to later revelations in the game about who Margit actually is, which we will get to much later in this list. Easter Egg 3, Margit's dialogue and what he actually knows. Margit's voice lines during the fight are unusually specific. He does not speak in vague threats the way many early game gatekeepers in From Software games tend to. He says things that suggest he has been watching the Tarnished for some time, that he knows what they are pursuing, and that he finds their ambition pathetic rather than threatening. He calls you Tarnished with a particular emphasis that implies familiarity. He says the Erdtree will not have you, and he speaks of your ilk as a recurring problem rather than a novel one. This points toward the idea that Margit has been stationed at the approach to Stormvale Castle, specifically to prevent Tarnished from reaching Godric, and that this is not the first time he has done this. He has watched many Tarnished come and fail. His condescension is earned from his perspective. He is not arrogant without reason. He has been right many times before. Easter egg 4. The connection between Margit and Morgott. This one is arguably the most significant lore reveal in the entire first half of the game, but it is delivered so quietly that a huge number of players miss it entirely the first time through. Margit the Fell Omen and Morgott the Omen King are the same being. They are the same character, wearing different masks, literally and figuratively. Margit is a disguise that Morgott adopts, a persona built out of concealment and necessity. Morgott is an omen, meaning he was born with a cursed body, covered in horns that the Golden Order considered a mark of damnation. Rather than hiding in shame, he became the greatest protector the Erdtree ever had, but he could not do so openly because his very existence was considered an abomination under the law of the order he served. So he created Margit. The name itself is thought by some in the lore community to be a kind of inversion or transformation of his real identity. When you fight Margit and then fight Morgott later in Leyndell, you are fighting the same character twice, and the difference between those two encounters is one of the most quietly devastating character arcs in the game. Morgott has abandoned the disguise. He fights you as himself, horns exposed, genuinely heartbroken rather than condescending. The shift in tone between those two fights carries an enormous amount of emotional weight once you understand what is happening. Easter egg 5. Morgott's golden sealing magic and what it means. When you reach Morgott in Leyndell, the royal capital, you fight him in a throne room surrounded by golden seals that he has placed throughout the city. These seals are what has been holding back the Omen Kings and keeping the capital intact as much of the lands between has fallen into chaos. Morgott has been doing this alone, without acknowledgement, without recognition, and against the explicit logic of his own existence as an omen. He is a being the Golden Order says should not exist, spending everything he has to protect an order that would condemn him if it could see clearly what he was. The golden sealing magic he uses in this fight is visually and mechanically distinct from the conjured weapons Margit uses. It is heavier, more desperate, more elaborate. The seals he throws into the floor during the fight are not just attack patterns. They are an extension of the same sealing work he has been doing across the capital. He is still trying to contain things, even while fighting you. One reading of this is that Morgott never truly stops working, even in the middle of the fight that ends his life. He cannot switch off that compulsion. Easter egg 6. Morgott's final words. When Morgott falls, he delivers one of the more understated and genuinely sad lines in the entire game. He warns the player, in a voice that is no longer condescending or theatrical, that the Erdtree will not yield. He calls out to the Erdtree itself, using a tone that some lore readers have described as grief rather than defiance. He has spent his entire existence protecting something that never loved him back, and in his final moments, he is still concerned about it rather than himself. This is a small thing, easy to absorb without registering its full weight, but it repositions everything about the Margit encounter earlier in the game. That smirking, theatrical figure with the walking cane is the same being who dies here, with genuine sorrow on his lips. The contrast is not played for drama in any obvious way. It is just there, quietly, for the player who is paying attention. Easter egg 7. Godric the Grafted and the visual language of grafting. Godric the Grafted is, on the surface, a grotesque figure, a deposed ruler who has covered his body with the limbs of others and who guards Stormvale Castle with paranoid desperation. But the visual design of his grafting carries specific lore weight that is easy to gloss over. The arms and limbs attached to his body are not just random human limbs. If you look carefully at his design, there is a deliberate suggestion that some of those grafted parts belong to warriors and soldiers, people who were presumably killed in battle or sacrifice so that Godric could absorb their strength. This connects to the item descriptions surrounding Godric, which suggest that grafting was originally a sacred, or at least recognized practice in the lands between, something tied to the act of recombining the body in service of a greater power. Godric has perverted this into something done out of fear and self-preservation rather than devotion. He is the weakest of the demigods by reputation, the one considered least worthy of the great rune he carries, and grafting is his answer to that inadequacy. Easter egg 8. Godric's connection to Godfrey. Godric is a descendant of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and this ancestry is something he is acutely aware of and deeply insecure about. The suffix in his name is not accidental. The connection between Godric and Godfrey is meant to be read as ironic. Godfrey was a towering, supremely powerful warrior who was exiled from the lands. Between after the Shattering, because his strength was no longer needed, Godric is his descendant in name and bloodline, but almost nowhere else. Where Godfrey projected absolute confidence and primal power, Godric projects desperation and fraudulence. The grafted dragon arm he acquires in the second phase of the fight, severing his own arm and replacing it with a dragon's, is one reading of this contrast made literal. He cannot win on the terms that made his ancestor great, so he takes power from elsewhere by force. It is the same logic as grafting applied in miniature, and it ultimately does not save him. Easter egg 9. Godric's voice acting and the shift in his tone. Godric's pre-fight cutscene has him grovelling and pleading as you approach, before snapping into aggression. This flip is not just theatrics. The grovelling is genuine, at least as one reading of his character goes. Godric has been humiliated, driven from the capital, and reduced to hiding in a crumbling castle, while far more powerful demigods hold larger territories. His instinct when cornered is to beg, because that is what someone who knows they are outmatched does. The aggression that follows is the other side of the same coin. He is not confident, he is terrified, and terrified beings either flee or attack with everything they have. His shout as he grafts the dragon arm is not triumphant, it is frantic. The voice performance captures this fairly precisely if you are listening for it, rather than just focusing on the attack patterns. Easter egg 10. The Red Wolf of Radagon and what it guards. The Red Wolf of Radagon is a boss that many players find strange, because it seems disconnected from the main narrative thread of Raya Lucaria Academy. You are there to find Renala, and the wolf feels like an obstacle rather than a meaningful figure. But the Red Wolf exists as a guardian of something very specific, which is Radagon's presence within the Academy. Radagon was married to Renala before he left her to marry Queen Marika, and his departure was, by all accounts, one of the most consequential events in the history of the lands between. The wolf is, in one reading, a remnant or construct of Radagon's power left behind in the Academy, a guardian that persists because Radagon's energy is still woven into the institution. The fire it breathes and the sword it conjures in its mouth are made of glintstone and fire in combination, which mirrors Radagon's own dual nature as someone who moved between the world of the Academy and the world of the Golden Order. The wolf is not just a random magical creature, it is a fingerprint. Easter egg 11. The sword in the Red Wolf's mouth. The Red Wolf of Radagon conjures a glintstone sword directly in its mouth and bites down on it before using it in attacks. This is a strange and specific visual that is worth dwelling on. In the world of Elden Ring, sorcery and physical combat are generally considered distinct disciplines, and the Academy has historically looked down on the kind of faith-based physical combat tradition that Radagon ultimately came to represent. One possible reading of the sword in the wolf's mouth is that it represents the tension within Radagon himself, who began as a sorcerer aligned with the Academy and became increasingly devoted to the Golden Order's physical and faith-based power. The wolf holds both in its jaws simultaneously, unable to reconcile them, forced to wield them together anyway. Whether that reading is intended or not, it is a striking image that does not have an obvious explanation if you take it purely at face value. Easter egg 12. Renala's first phase and the students. Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, is fought in two distinct phases, and the first phase is one of the stranger boss encounters in the game. You enter a massive library and find Renala floating in the air, while her students, or constructs built in the image of students, carry her and chant in devotion. The students attack you, and the only way to progress is to find the ones carrying a golden light and hit them to drop Renala to the ground. This mechanic is unusual and a little dreamlike, and that is by design. Renala is not a fully coherent presence at this point in her story. She was shattered by Radagon's abandonment, and she has spent an indeterminate amount of time in a kind of grief-induced stasis inside the Academy's great library. The first phase represents something like her subconscious state. Her broken mind still surrounded by devotion, she is constructed or kept around her because she cannot process its absence. The students chanting and carrying her are not loyal retainers in any functional sense. They are projections of a world she has built to insulate herself from a grief she cannot face. Easter egg 13. The babies in Renala's second phase. When Renala's second phase begins, she carries an amber egg and chants over it before the real fight starts. And during the second phase, she summons creatures from that egg, strange malformed beings that look like failed attempts at life. This connects directly to one of the saddest elements of Renala's lore, which is that, after Radagon left, she became obsessed with rebirth and renewal. She learned, or perhaps already knew, the art of rebirthing, which in the world of Elden Ring is a literal magical process that allows beings to reshape their physical form. She turned this power inward and began attempting to use it to recreate, or perhaps to hatch, something from the amber egg. The community has debated for a long time what exactly is in that egg. One reading suggests it is connected to Michaela, Renala, and Radagon's son, who is elsewhere in the game, entombed in his own cocoon. Another reading suggests she is simply trying to create new life as a replacement for what she lost. The malformed summons she conjures suggest that whatever she is trying to do is not going well. Easter egg 14. Renala's pose during her second phase summons. When Renala summons creatures during the second phase, she adopts a very specific posture, sitting cross-legged in the air, cradling the egg, and looking downward with an expression that reads as tenderness rather than menace. She is not trying to kill you in the way that a warrior or conqueror would be. She is trying to protect something. The entire second phase fight, if you pay attention to what Renala is actually doing, rather than just the things she sends at you, reads more like a defensive action than an offensive one. She is not attacking you because she wants to fight. She is holding you back while continuing to tend to whatever she is nurturing. This is consistent with her lore, which suggests that she withdrew from the world after Radagon's departure, and has not truly engaged with external events since. You are an interruption to her, not an enemy in any meaningful sense. She probably does not fully understand why you are there. Easter egg 15. Radagon's connection to the stars. Star Scourge Radagon is one of the most visually iconic bosses in the game, a demigod so enormous that he rides a horse that can barely support his weight, floating above the ground through gravity magic. But the most significant detail in Radagon's design and lore is the star connection. Radagon stopped the stars in their courses. He waged war against the heavens themselves and won, holding every star in the sky in place through sheer gravitational power. This is presented as one of the greatest feats of any demigod, and it has direct consequences for the world. Among the stars being held in place is the falling star that will eventually become relevant to another character's fate, specifically Malenia's, and the comet that is associated with Astal and the Nox civilizations. Radagon did not stop the stars for purely abstract reasons. There is a suggestion in his item descriptions that he did it to prevent a specific fate from unfolding, to hold back something he understood would be catastrophic if the stars were allowed to move. What exactly he feared is not stated plainly, but the scale of what he did is. Easter egg 16. Radan's horse, Leonard. Radan's horse is named Leonard, and this detail is given to you if you explore the Redmane Castle area and speak to certain NPCs before the festival begins. Leonard is a small horse, clearly undersized for Radan's massive frame, and Radan has learned gravity magic, in part to reduce his own effective weight, so that Leonard can carry him. This is one of the most quietly characterful pieces of lore in the entire game. Here is a demigod of enormous power who devoted himself to studying a complex and difficult magical discipline, at least in part so that he would not have to give up his horse. Radan and Leonard have been together since before the shattering. Through Radan's subsequent transformation into a scarlet rot-consumed, feral version of himself after the events at the Halig Tree, Leonard still carries him. Even in his maddened state, Radan does not abandon or harm his horse. Whatever has been lost in Radan's mind, that attachment remains. Easter egg 17. Radan's second phase and the meteor. When Radan's health is depleted in the first phase of his festival fight, he launches himself into the sky and disappears entirely. After a pause, he returns as a falling meteor, slamming into the ground in a massive explosion to begin the second phase. This is not just a dramatic entrance. It mirrors, almost exactly, the trajectory of the stars he has been holding in place. Radan has become, in his diseased and maddened state, something like the very thing he was restraining. He held the stars back, and now he falls like one. One reading of this is that the scarlet rot that consumed him has eroded whatever discipline and control allowed him to maintain the gravitational hold on the sky, and that his consciousness, his identity as a general and a son of Radagon, is also eroding in parallel. The meteor form is not a deliberate combat choice. It is what he has become. Easter egg 18. The Radan Festival and what it actually is. The Radan Festival is presented to the player as a tournament, a gathering of warriors from across the lands between to battle the Star Scourge. Characters like Alexander the Iron Fist and Blade show up for it with enthusiasm, framing it as a great and storied event. But there is a darker reading of the festival that is available if you look at the context carefully. Radan is not a capable combatant anymore in any meaningful sense. He has been consumed by scarlet rot and reduced to something between a beast and a force of nature. The festival is, in one reading, a mercy killing dressed up as a celebration. The warriors attending are there to end Radan's suffering under a cultural framework that allows everyone involved to feel better about what they're doing. Killing a maddened, disease-eaten demigod in a head-on fight is something you can honour. Simply putting him down is not something that fits the cultural values of anyone who loved him. So they invented the festival, and when you, the Tarnished, land the killing blow, the game frames it as a triumph that also reads as a release. Easter egg 19. What happens after Radan dies? When Radan is killed, the stars he was holding begin to move again. This is mentioned explicitly by certain NPCs and is the trigger for several questline progressions in the game. The falling star associated with Ranni's questline crashes in a specific location after Radan's death, which suggests that Ranni, and possibly Bled, knew exactly what would happen when Radan fell, and that his defeat was engineered at least in part to allow that star to fall. Blade's enthusiastic participation in the festival, when you know his connection to Ranni, takes on a different quality when you understand this. He was not just there to fight. He may have been there to ensure that a specific outcome occurred. This does not mean he was cynical about Radan or indifferent to his suffering. It means that the situation was complicated in a way that the surface framing of the festival does not fully acknowledge. Easter egg 20. The fire giant and the cauldron on his chest. The fire giant is one of the more ancient bosses in the game, a survivor of a nearly extinct race that was defeated by Marika during or after the war against the giants. One of the most specific and unusual details of his design is the eye embedded in the large cauldron or urn that his body revolves around in the second phase. The giants in Elden Ring were the keepers of the Flame of Ruin, a destructive fire that threatened the Erd Tree and was ultimately used to ignite it. The eye on the cauldron is thought by many lore readers to represent the flame itself, specifically the flame as something that sees and is aware rather than purely a destructive force. The giants did not just wield the Flame of Ruin as a weapon, they were its custodians, its worshippers, and in some sense its vessels. The eye looking out from the cauldron of the last surviving giant suggests that the flame is still present inside him, looking out at the world through him, waiting. Easter egg 21. The fire giant's chained leg. The fire giant has a massive chain attached to one of his legs. This chain is an explicit symbol of his imprisonment and defeat. After Marika's forces won the war against the giants, the last of the fire giants was not killed but kept alive, specifically to maintain the Flame of Ruin for when it would be needed. Marika needed the flame eventually, as part of a plan that most of the characters in the game do not fully understand. Keeping the giant alive while defeating him was the compromise. The chain is how that compromise was enforced, and the giant has been wearing it long enough that it has become part of his visual identity. It is not a wound or an injury in the conventional sense. It is a yoke. And the fire giant has been carrying it alone at the top of the world for an effectively incalculable amount of time, which is either a tragedy or a necessity, depending on how you read Marika's overall plan. Easter egg 22. The fire giant's detachable lower body. In the second phase of the fire giant fight, he tears off his own lower body and discards it, reducing himself to a torso and arms and fighting from a crawling position. This is a shocking moment the first time you see it, and it plays as viscerally grotesque in the best possible way. But there is lore content embedded in that action. The giant's lower body, specifically his legs, are where the chains are attached. By tearing himself free of his legs, he is symbolically breaking the chains that have bound him. He cannot do this literally. The chains are spiritual and magical as much as they are physical. But in his last moments, faced with death, he discards the chains anyway, even at the cost of his own body. Whether this is a final act of defiance or simply desperation, it changes the energy of the second phase significantly once you understand what you're looking at. Easter egg 23. Godskin Noble and Godskin Apostle as a duo. The Godskin Noble and Godskin Apostle are fought individually in multiple places throughout the game, but they also appear together as a paired boss in the Spirit Caller Snail fight inside the Snowfield area's cave. The Godskin cultists are among the oldest enemies in the game's lore, predating the Erd Tree's dominion and connected to a time when the god of death, specifically the Glow-Eyed Queen, held power. Their skin-wearing, god-killing purpose is something that has been almost entirely eradicated from the lands between by the time the game takes place. But what is easy to miss is the visual distinction between the noble and the apostle beyond just size. The noble is rotund, almost comically so, and fights with a whip-like motion that stretches and rolls his body in ways that should not be possible. The apostle is tall and lean and fights with a scythe. This contrast in body type mirrors a specific thematic split in what the Godskin faction represents. The noble in one reading represents corruption made comfortable, decadence, power that has settled into itself and grown fat. The apostle represents asceticism, the lean and blade-focused aspect of a religion that demands sacrifice. Together, they cover both ends of a philosophical spectrum. Easter egg 24. The Godskin Peeler weapon and what it describes. The Godskin Peeler is a weapon that can be acquired from a Godskin apostle and its description is fairly explicit about what the godskin cult does. They peel the skin from gods and wear it. The item description frames this as both a ritual act and a practical one, since the skin of a god apparently confers abilities or protection. What is less often discussed is the implication that gods in the world of Elden Ring can be killed, and that their physical remains have transferable properties. This positions the godskin cult not as nihilistic destroyers, but as something closer to a surgical tradition, practitioners of god killing not for chaos but for the purpose of harvesting and redistributing divine power. Under the Glomide Queen, this was a recognized practice, a counterbalance to the accumulation of divine power in the hands of a few. The Golden Order's extermination of the godskin cult can be read, from this angle, as a monopoly protecting itself. Easter egg 25. Malekith the Blackblade and the name Blackblade. Malekith, the Blackblade, is Gurranq the Beast Clergyman's true form, and the reveal of this is handled with the same quiet devastation that characterizes Elden Ring's best lore moments. Malekith wields the Blackblade, which is made from a fragment of the Rune of Death, specifically the rune that Marika had surgically removed from the Elden Ring and entrusted to Malekith to seal away. The Blackblade causes wounds that reduce the target's maximum health over time, because it inflicts a kind of death that the Erd Tree's restoration cannot reverse. The name Blackblade specifically contrasts with the golden weapons associated with the Golden Order and with Marika herself. Everything Marika built is golden, radiant, and associated with life and undeath through the Erd Tree. Malekith's weapon is the photographic negative of that system. It is the tool that can end what the Erd Tree's power normally prevents from ending. Marika gave him the most dangerous thing in her world to hold, and he has held it, alone, in increasingly compromised states, for the entire duration of her plan. Easter egg 26. Gurranq eating Deathroot. Before you know that Gurranq is Malekith, you encounter him as a beast clergyman in the Bestial Sanctum, a wild and chaotic creature who asks you to bring him Deathroot in exchange for incantations. The Deathroot connection is strange if you think about it. Malekith is the guardian of the Rune of Death, the entity tasked with keeping death sealed away from the world. Gurranq eats Deathroot, which is a physical manifestation of those things that have escaped the seal, specifically the remnants of creatures that should not have been able to evade death's proper function. He eats them to contain them, to consume what has leaked out and bring it back inside himself. This is an almost literal visualization of his purpose. He is a container for death's energy, and when the leaks occur, he deals with them by absorbing them. But eating Deathroot also destabilizes him. When you bring him enough of it, he attacks you, maddened by what he has absorbed. He is being eroded by the very thing he exists to contain. One reading of Gurranq's entire arc is that the seal is not just weakening in the world, it is weakening inside him. Easter egg 27. Dragonlord Placidusax and the Missing God. Dragonlord Placidusax is an optional boss in Farum Azula, accessible only through a hidden sleeping position in a specific location, and he is one of the most lore-dense entities in the entire game. Placidusax was Elden Lord before Godfrey, which means he predates the entire framework of the game's main narrative. But the detail that the lore most emphasizes about Placidusax is not his age or his power, it is the fact that his god abandoned him. The Dragon Lords had a god before Marika, before the Elden Ring, as it exists in the game's present. That god left, disappeared, and Placidusax has been waiting in Farum Azula, which exists outside of linear time, ever since. He is still waiting. The item description for his remembrance says explicitly that he waits for his god's return in the storm beyond time. This is one of the saddest images in the game. An ancient, world-spanning being of immense power, alone in a crumbling ruin outside time, waiting for someone who has not come back in what must be an effectively infinite amount of time. Easter egg 28. Placidusax's two heads. Placidusax has two heads, and there is a specific lore reason for this. He was not always a two-headed dragon. Originally, he had more heads, and the empty skeletal structure on his body, where additional heads would have been, suggests that he lost them, possibly in the Great War or Cataclysm that preceded the current age. The two remaining heads are the ones that survived whatever catastrophe he endured. This connects to the broader idea of Farum Azula as a place that exists in a state of arrested collapse, a ruin frozen in the moment of its own destruction by the temporal anomaly that defines the location. Placidusax himself is a kind of human-scale version of that same arrested state. He is a being frozen in the moment before completion. Whether that completion means his god's return, his own death, or something else entirely, he is not sleeping when you find him. Not exactly. He is suspended. Easter egg 29. Malenia and the Scarlet Rot Flower. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, is probably the most discussed boss in Elden Ring, and possibly in all of From Software's catalogue. Her difficulty aside, she is also one of the most layered characters in the lore. Malenia was born with scarlet rot in her body, a divine curse in the sense that it came with her being the daughter of Radagon and Marika, the two halves of the same being. The scarlet rot is in one reading a physical manifestation of an imbalance, the presence of something corrupting in what should be a pure divine lineage. But what is sometimes overlooked is the fact that Malenia has spent her entire life mastering herself in relation to this curse, rather than eliminating it. She has not suppressed the rot. She has learned to exist alongside it, to seal it within herself through an act of continuous will. The flower that blooms from her body in her second phase is what happens when that seal breaks completely. It is not a transformation she chose. It is the thing she's been holding back, finally released. Easter egg 30. Malenia's second phase and the Scarlet Valkyrie. When Malenia blooms in the second phase and becomes the goddess of rot, she gains wings of rot fungus, and her attacks leave fields of scarlet flowers on the ground. This form is directly connected to the event at Caelid, known as the Scarlet Bloom, in which Malenia detonated her scarlet rot in a battle against Radahn. The bloom at Caelid is described as the second of three possible blooms. The first happened during Malenia's childhood, apparently accidentally or involuntarily. The Caelid bloom was the second, triggered by the extremity of her battle against Radahn, a battle she was losing on purely martial terms. She bloomed to end the fight, and in doing so, she created the scarlet rot wasteland that defines Caelid. The third bloom has not happened yet within the game's main timeline. Her second phase form is a preview of what the third bloom would look like if it were ever fully unleashed. The wings, the flowers, the halo of rot above her head. It is a deeply beautiful and deeply horrifying image, and it is deliberately rendered with aesthetic qualities that make it difficult to process as purely monstrous. Easter egg 31. Malenia's lifesteal mechanic and what it represents. Malenia has a mechanic that caused enormous controversy when the game launched, which is that she heals herself with every hit she lands on the player, even if that hit is blocked. This is unusual in a From Software game, and many players initially assumed it was a bug. It is not. This mechanic is directly tied to her lore. Malenia is described as someone who has never once known defeat, and this is not just a boast. It is a statement about how her body works. Her body converts damage dealt into sustenance. She takes life from the act of combat in a way that mirrors, metaphorically, the scarlet rot's behaviour as an organism, which spreads by taking energy from what it infects. Malenia has internalized this at a physical level. Her invincibility is not arrogance, it is biology. The mechanic is uncomfortable and punishing in gameplay terms precisely because it is meant to convey that she operates by different rules than anything else you have fought. Easter egg 32. Millennia's connection to Miquella. The title Blade of Miquella is not ceremonial. Millennia dedicated herself specifically to Miquella, her brother, and protected him during his life and afterward. Miquella is one of the most unusual beings in the lands between, a demigod who grew tired of divine inheritance and tried to create his own order independent of the Golden Order and the Erd Tree. He built the Halig Tree as an alternative to the Erd Tree for those the Golden Order excluded, specifically Misbegotten and Albinorix. The fact that Millennia, who carries a divine curse herself, devoted herself to this project suggests a shared understanding between them about what it means to be born unwanted by the system that should love you. Millennia's devotion to Miquella is not the blind loyalty of a soldier. It is the love of someone who found in one other being a complete understanding of what her existence has been. Easter egg 33. Mohg and the unalloyed gold needle. Mohg, Lord of Blood, kidnapped Miquella's cocoon from the Halig Tree and brought it to his palace beneath the capital. His plan, as much as it can be reconstructed from item descriptions and environmental lore, was to use Miquella's power to elevate himself to the status of a new outer god, specifically by waking Miquella and becoming his consort, his equal, in a new age of his own making. The critical detail here is the unalloyed gold needle, which appears in Mohg's arena after his death if you have it in your possession. Using the needle on Miquella's cocoon during the Mohg fight's aftermath triggers an entire questline, and what the needle does is sever the connection between Miquella and the Formless Mother, the outer god whose power runs through Mohg. Miquella had apparently left something of himself in the needle as a failsafe, understanding that his cocoon might be stolen and his vulnerability exploited. He prepared for this betrayal in advance. Easter egg 34. Mohg's brand on the player's hand. If you approach Miquella's cocoon in Mohg's arena without triggering the alternate questline content, Mohg's blood curse activates and places a brand on the Tarnished's hand. This is a mark of the Formless Mother, the outer god of blood, and it functions as a claim over the branded individual. The Formless Mother is described as a god that desires wounds and bleeding, specifically the bleeding of the Grace Blessed. Mohg received her power as an omen, and he has spent his existence serving her in exchange for that power. The brand he places on the player is an attempt to bring the Tarnished into that same relationship. It is not just an attack mechanic, it is an offer, or perhaps a demand, that the Tarnished become a vessel for the Formless Mother the way Mohg has. The player rejecting this and killing Mohg is, from the Formless Mother's perspective, a failed attempt at acquisition. Easter egg 35. Rykard and the Snake. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, underwent a deliberate transformation that is one of the more disturbing character choices in the game's lore. He voluntarily fed himself to the god-devouring serpent, an ancient creature housed in Volcano Manor, in order to merge with it and acquire its power. The serpent is described as an entity that has been devouring gods for an indeterminate amount of time, accumulating their power without becoming divine itself. Rykard's logic was that by merging with the serpent he could access this accumulated power, while also perpetuating his own consciousness inside the serpent's body. What he became is described as something other than either a demigod or a serpent. He is a new kind of hybrid entity, and his explicit stated goal after the merger was to continue devouring gods until nothing remained of the divine order that he considered oppressive and corrupt. He rejected the Erdtree's authority as a legitimate system for organizing the world, and his method of rejection was to eat it from the outside in. Easter egg 36. The Serpent Hunter Great Spear. The Serpent Hunter is a great spear found inside Volcano Manor specifically, and only before or during the Rykard fight, and it is described as a weapon made to hunt the god-devouring serpent. Its item description says that it was left by someone who knew the serpent would eventually be challenged. The weapon has an anomalous damage bonus against Rykard specifically, doing substantially more damage than it does to anything else in the game. The implication of this detail is that someone prepared for the eventuality of Rykard's transformation and the need to stop him, leaving the weapon inside the very building where the serpent lived, accessible to whoever arrived to challenge it. Who left it there is not stated. Some lore readers connect it to the Two Fingers or to the Greater Will's agents as a contingency plan. Others suggest it might have been left by someone inside Volcano Manor who had regrets. The ambiguity is part of its interest. Easter egg 37. Rykard's dialogue during the fight. Rykard speaks during the fight in a way that is unusual for Elden Ring bosses, who generally do not deliver extended speeches while you're actively trying to kill them. Rykard invites you to join him. He frames the fight not as a conflict, but as a recruitment pitch, suggesting that any being with sense would abandon the Eard Tree and come to his side. His tone is charismatic and even charming in a deeply unsettling way, the tone of someone who genuinely believes in what they are saying rather than the theatrical grandiosity of a villain. He talks about the Golden Order as a system of lies and about the Tarnished's grace as a leash rather than a gift. Whether or not his analysis is correct is a question the game leaves open. Some of what Rykard says about the Greater Will and its relationship to the inhabitants of the lands between is supported by lore evidence elsewhere in the game. He is not entirely wrong. He has just chosen a method of opposition that happens to involve eating the divine structure of existence. Easter egg 38. Astel, natural born of the void. Astel is a boss that feels categorically different from everything else in Elden Ring, and deliberately so. It is a creature that fell from space, a literal meteor creature from outside the known cosmos of the lands between. Its body is a nightmare assemblage of celestial material, enormous and insectoid, with a skull that suggests something both organic and astronomical. Astel is connected to the Night of the Black Knives and to the assassination of Godwyn the Golden through a chain of events that is frankly labyrinthine in its complexity. But the most striking detail about Astel is simpler than all of that. Astel represents the thing from outside. Every major power in the lands between, the Golden Order, the Elden Ring, the Outer Gods, they are all internal to the cosmos of the game, in some sense. Astel comes from somewhere else entirely. Its motivations, if it has any, are incomprehensible within the frameworks that the game provides. It is not evil in the way that Mog is evil, or Rykard is evil. It simply does not belong to the same universe of meaning. Easter egg 39. Astel's teleportation grab. Astel has an attack where it teleports a short distance and then grabs the player from behind, which is widely considered one of the more infuriating attacks in the game. But the teleportation is not just a mobility tool, it mirrors the nature of what Astel represents, a being that arrived in the lands between by travelling through the void between stars, by crossing distances that should be uncrossable. Its movement during combat reflects the physics of its origin. It does not run or fly in the conventional sense. It displaces itself, appearing elsewhere, because the normal rules of spatial continuity do not quite apply to it. This is a minor point in gameplay terms, but it is a coherent one in lore terms. The game's most alien boss moves in the most alien way. Easter egg 40. The Crucible Knights and what the Crucible is. The Crucible Knights appear throughout the game as elite enemies and boss encounters, and they represent something very specific and very old in the world's history. The Crucible refers to the crucible of life, a primordial state of existence before the Erd Tree's light organized and separated the forms of living things. In the Crucible, all life was undifferentiated, mixed together, able to manifest attributes from other creatures. Erd Tree branches, beast horns, draconic scales, All of these could appear on any body. The Crucible Knights are warriors from the age when Godfrey served as Elden Lord, and they fought in a style that incorporates crucible incantations, attacks that manifest those ancient mixed attributes. The tail sweep, the draconic wing, the horns, these are not magical enhancements, they are ancestral traits that have been retained and cultivated from the primordial age. The Crucible Knights are, in one reading, the most ancient living tradition of combat in the lands between. A direct connection to the era before the Golden Order defined what life was supposed to look like. Easter egg 41. The grafted scion at the start of the game. The very first enemy most players encounter in Elden Ring is the grafted scion, a nightmarish creature assembled from multiple bodies, covered in arms and heads and weapons. Most players die to this creature and are then transported to the tutorial area, which creates the impression that the grafted scion is just a shock intro, a way to communicate the game's difficulty. But the grafted scion is canonically significant. It appears to be a servant or creation of Godric, made using the same grafting techniques that Godric applies to himself. Finding one at the very beginning of the game, before you have any context, is the game's way of introducing the grafting motif before you understand what it means. The entire first act of the game, culminating in the fight with Godric, is framed by this image of bodies combined against their will. The grafted scion is the thesis statement, Easter egg 42, the Tree Sentinel's armor and what it means. The Tree Sentinel is the first field boss players are likely to encounter in Limgrave, a mounted knight in golden armor patrolling the path to the first major site of grace. He is extremely dangerous for early players and functions as a visible signal that the world will challenge you on its own terms. But the Tree Sentinel's lore is richer than his role, as a tutorial speed bump suggests. His armor set, the Erdtree Great Shield, and the golden halberd he carries all indicate that he is a servant of the Erdtree in its official institutional capacity. He is not a soldier of any king or demigod. He serves the tree directly. The Tree Sentinels, as a class of soldier, exist specifically to patrol the roads between sites of grace and to challenge those who travel those roads. This is an interesting detail because the sites of grace are the Tarnished's primary means of navigation and restoration. The Tree Sentinel's presence on the road between grace sites suggests that the Erdtree's institutional church has always had an ambivalent relationship with the Tarnished's guidance. He is guarding the road rather than welcoming travellers along it. Easter egg 43, Knights Cavalry and what they patrol. The Knights Cavalry are large, mounted spectral knights that patrol certain roads after dark throughout the lands between. They do not appear during the day and vanish with the sunrise, which is a gameplay mechanic, but also a lore detail. The Knights Cavalry are connected to the Golden Order's funerary traditions, specifically to the practice of guiding the dead toward their proper rest. Their presence on roads at night can be read as a continuation of that function, spirits that persist in their duty after death, patrolling the paths between sites and ensuring that the journey of the dead toward the Erdtree is properly overseen. When you kill them, you receive their equipment, which is associated with the Knights Cavalry's specific aesthetics of dark armor and spectral horses. The horse itself is spectral, which raises the question of whether the knight and the horse died together, or whether the horse, too, has a relationship with the funerary tradition that extends beyond physical death. Easter egg 44. The Ancestor Spirit boss and the connection to Roa. The Ancestor Spirit is summoned in Siofra River by lighting all the burial fires and finding the lone elk corpse at the centre of the area. It is a deer-like creature made of antlers and spectral energy, and it is one of the more visually gentle boss designs in the game, despite the fight itself being fairly difficult. The Ancestor Spirit is connected to the traditional worship practices of the inhabitants of the subterranean areas, people who lived away from the Erdtree's direct influence and maintained their own spiritual traditions. The deer spirit they worship is associated with a cyclical, natural conception of life and death that predates the Golden Order's intervention. Roa, the berries that appear on the bushes throughout these areas, are part of the same tradition. The berries and the spirit deer are connected to a cosmology where life consumes death, and death feeds life in a continuous cycle, rather than the eared trees model, where life is preserved and death is sealed away. The fight with the ancestor spirit is, in one reading, a communion rather than a conflict. Easter egg 45. The regal ancestor spirit's location. The regal ancestor spirit, which is a larger and more powerful version of the ancestor spirit, is found in Nokron, the Eternal City. Nokron is a subterranean city that the Nox people built as a response to the Greater Will's rejection of their civilization. The Nox people were driven underground and their city was sealed beneath the earth after they attempted to create their own Elden Ring analogue, a cosmological transgression that the Greater Will punished severely. The fact that the regal ancestor spirit, associated with the pre-Golden Order natural cycle, has its home in a city defined by rejection of the Greater Will's authority is a suggestive juxtaposition. The natural death cycle and the Nox's cosmological rebellion are not the same thing, but they share a common opponent. One possible reading is that the Nox sheltered or venerated the regal ancestor spirit precisely because it represented an alternative to the cosmological framework that had condemned them. Easter egg 46. Elima of the Briar and the bell-bearing hunter connection. Elima of the Briar is a boss found in the Shaded Castle, an imposing knight who controls his weapons telekinetically from across a room while remaining largely stationary. His armor set and weapon suggest a history of violence and a particular aesthetic of thorns and brutality. What is interesting about Elima in a lore context is what the bell-bearing hunter mechanic tells you by contrast. The bell-bearing hunter is a spirit that invades at sites of grace and attacks the player at night, and it is connected to a tradition of hunters who seek out merchants and traders carrying bell bearings. Elima's lore, when assembled from item descriptions, suggests that he was connected to a tradition of high-risk raiding and violence that operated outside of normal social structures in the lands between. He is not simply a bandit, he is the end product of a system where certain classes of being were denied protection by the existing order and developed their own violent traditions in response. Whether Elima specifically connects to the bell-bearing hunter is debated, but the thematic overlap between their aesthetics and their relationship to the economy of the lands between is consistent enough to be worth noting. Easter egg 47. Lich Dragon, Fortisax, and Godwyn. Lich Dragon Fortisax is a dragon fought in the deepest part of the Deeproot depths, and he is connected to Godwyn the Golden through a relationship that is one of the most genuinely moving things in Elden Ring's lore. Godwyn was the first of Marika's children to die, killed by Black Knife assassins on the Night of the Black Knives. His death was unusual because only his soul was killed, leaving his body alive and increasingly corrupted. His body, rooted into the ground at the Deeproot depths, became a site of spreading death blight. Fortisax was Godwyn's closest ally and friend, one of the ancient dragons who formed a pact with the Golden Order during Godfrey's time. When Godwyn was killed and his body began to transform into something terrible, Fortisax descended into the depths and stayed with him. He has been fighting against the death blight, consuming Godwyn for the entire duration of the game's timeline, alone, refusing to let Godwyn's body fall entirely to the corruption. He is not a villain. He is a loyal friend who has been waging a private war for a cause he has already lost, simply because he cannot bring himself to leave. Easter egg 48. The visual design of Fortisax's arena. The arena where you fight Fortisax is one of the most visually distinctive in the game. You access it through Fia's questline, which is appropriate since Fia is the character whose own arc is directly connected to Godwyn's body and the nature of his deathless but soulless existence. The arena is a crimson and black space full of lightning, and Fortisax fights with a combination of Deathblight energy and Dragon Lightning, the two elements that define his current existence. He carries the rot of what Godwyn has become, fused with the ancient draconic power he has always had. The fight visually suggests that he has been absorbing some of the Deathblight himself in the process of trying to contain it. He is not unaffected by his vigil. Whatever Fortisax was before the Night of the Black Knives, he has changed in the long years since. The fight you have with him is not with an uncorrupted being fighting on behalf of someone else. It is with someone who has been changed by grief and by the proximity of something that consumes. Easter Egg 49. Godfrey, First Elden Lord, and the Golden Ghost. When you reach Lendel, you encounter a shade of Godfrey, a golden phantom version of the first Elden Lord that you must defeat to advance. This shade is a striking thing to fight because Godfrey, unlike most of the game's major figures, is presented with enormous physical clarity. He is just a very large, very powerful man. There is nothing grotesque or corrupted about him. No rot, no grafting, no divine madness. He is exactly what the title First Elden Lord suggests, a figure of pure martial achievement and confidence. The Shade fight is notable for feeling less like a tragic encounter and more like a test. Godfrey was defined by his love of battle and his need for challenges, and the Shade encounter feels consistent with that character in a way that is unusual for Elden Ring's boss encounters, which generally carry heavy emotional weight. The Shade just wants to fight you. That simplicity is, in context, remarkable. Easter Egg 50. Godfrey's full fight and Huara-Lu. The actual Godfrey fight in the Erdtree comes in two phases, and the second phase is one of the best boss experiences in the game. Godfrey removes his armor and his armor-stand companion Seresh, a lion-like creature who has been sitting on his back for the entire game without explanation, and becomes Huara-Lu, his original name and identity before he was made Elden Lord. Serosh, it turns out, was placed on Godfrey's back by Marika or by mutual agreement, specifically to suppress his battle instincts. Godfrey, as Elden Lord, needed to be a statesman as much as a warrior, and his primal love of combat was a liability in that role. Serosh is a symbol of civilizational restraint placed literally on the back of a force of nature. When Godfrey removes Serosh and becomes Huara-Lu again, he is not just changing his fighting style, he is shedding the entire project of civilization, returning to what he was before Marika found him. It is a moment of liberation that is also a moment of tragedy, because what he is liberating himself from is the relationship that defined his life. Easter Egg 51. Malekith and the connection to Gurank's hunger. Going back to Malekith for a moment, because there is a detail that gets missed in the excitement of the reveal. When you have been feeding Gurrank Deathroot throughout the game, and he periodically attacks you before returning to his usual demeanour, each attack corresponds to a destabilization caused by absorbing too much death energy. His hunger for Deathroot is described in his item drops as something he cannot fully control, a compulsion driven by his purpose rather than his will. This detail becomes significant when you understand that Malekith's purpose, guarding the Rune of Death, is the same compulsion at a higher scale. He has been holding death inside himself since the Erdtree was young, and the strain of that has compounded over an enormous amount of time. Gurank's feral, unstable behaviour is not a personality flaw. It is the visible result of an organism that has been containing something catastrophic for longer than most beings in the world have existed. His aggression toward you when destabilized is involuntary, not malicious. When you understand that, the moments where he attacks and then apologizes become genuinely sad rather than just frustrating mechanics. Easter egg 52. Sir Gideon Ofnir and what he knows. Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, fights you at the top of Lane just before the Godfrey encounter, and his fight is memorable for reasons that extend well beyond its difficulty or design. Gideon has spent the entire game gathering information about every other Tarnished and every major power in the lands between, and his dialogue during the fight reveals that he knows almost everything. He recites the names and locations and fates of your allies and companions with a thoroughness that is genuinely impressive and a little horrifying. But the detail that defines Gideon as a character is not what he knows. It is what he does with that knowledge. Gideon has concluded that nothing the player can do will succeed, that the Erd Tree's will cannot be challenged, that the campaign to become Elden Lord is doomed. He is not attacking you out of ambition or desperation. He is attacking you because he believes he is performing a mercy. His knowledge has led him to a form of nihilism that he has dressed up as pragmatism, and the tragedy of his arc is that a person who devoted their existence to knowing everything ended up using that knowledge to justify stopping rather than acting. Easter egg 53. Gideon's staff and the all-knowing armor set. Gideon's armor set, the all-knowing set, is covered in eyes. This is a deliberate visual motif connecting him to the concept of information as power, to surveillance, and to the idea that knowledge accumulated without ethical framework becomes a kind of corruption. The eyes on the armor look outward, suggesting that Gideon's entire self-identity is oriented toward observation and collection rather than action or connection. He knows everything about everyone except, apparently, himself, his own motivations, his own cowardice dressed as wisdom. The staff he uses is high level and capable of casting virtually every school of sorcery, reflecting his polymath approach to magical study. He has mastered everything and committed to nothing, and the armor he wears is the visual expression of that as a life philosophy. Easter egg 54. Commander Nile and the Spectral Knights. Commander Nile is a boss found in Castle Sol in the mountaintops of the Giants, and he is a veteran soldier who lost his legs and fights with prosthetics made from the legs of fallen knights. He is a human enemy in a game full of demigods and ancient entities, and the contrast is significant. His fight is one of the more mechanically challenging in the game, because he begins by summoning two spectral knights who represent the soldiers who served under him and died in battle. These spirits fight with him until you defeat them, and Nile's behaviour changes when they fall. He fights harder, or more desperately, after the spectral knights are gone. One reading of this is that Nile has been fighting alongside these men for so long, even in death, that losing them again, even in a simulation of combat, genuinely affects him. He has found a way to keep his dead soldiers with him, and having them taken away a second time is a specific loss that matters to him even in the context of a fight he may not survive. Easter egg 55. Loretta and the two versions of her fight. Loretta appears twice in the game as a boss, once as Royal Knight Loretta in the Carian Manor, and once as Loretta, Knight of the Halig Tree in the Halig Tree itself. The two fights are structurally similar because she's the same entity, a spirit or projection, not a living being in either case. Royal Knight Loretta guards the Carian Manor using the same skill set that Loretta used in life, an accomplished knight who served the royal family of Raya Lucaria, and then later devoted herself to protecting the path to the Halig Tree. The detail that makes this interesting is the context of each appearance. In the manor, she guards a place of history and legacy, the home of the Carian family. In the Halig Tree, she guards the destination that Malenia and Miquella built as a refuge. Loretta in life clearly transferred her loyalty from the old institution to the new one, from the academy and the royals to the Halig Tree and what it represented, a more inclusive and compassionate alternative. She is, in this reading, a character who made a moral choice and committed to it enough that her spirit continues to enforce it after death. Easter egg 56. The Black Knife Assassins and Ranni. The Black Knife Assassins are a group of assassins who carried out the Night of the Black Knives, the event that killed Godwyn and stripped Ranni of her body. They are encountered as boss enemies and elite enemies throughout the game, always female, always using the same curved black knives that glow with death energy. The connection to Ranni is significant. Ranni orchestrated the Night of the Black Knives, or at minimum was a central participant in it. She used the assassins to kill Godwyn and to kill her own body, separating her soul from her flesh and effectively removing herself from the divine plan that her parents Radagon and Marika had built. The Black Knife Assassins are, in one reading, agents of Ranni's liberation, as much as they are instruments of assassination. They carry weapons made from a fragment of the Rune of Death, the same rune that Maliketh guards, which suggests that the operation involved obtaining that fragment from Maliketh's keeping. How exactly this was done is one of the great unsolved questions in the lore. Easter egg 57. The Black Knife and its specific weapon design. The Black Knife weapon, which can be found in the game and wielded by the player, has a unique skill called Blade of Death, which fires a crescent of death energy. This skill mirrors the attack that kills in a unique way, specifically by only removing a portion of the victim's vital energy, rather than simply dealing damage. The Night of the Black Knives killed Godwyn's soul while leaving his body alive, an effect that is described as the specific outcome of the Black Knife's design. The weapon was made for a targeted, specific form of killing, one that removes the soul without removing the body, and the skill reflects this. The fact that you can find this weapon and use it is a detail that some lore readers find unsettling, because you're using the exact weapon that set the game's entire catastrophic chain of events in motion. Easter egg 58. Bloodhound Knight Darrowil and Blade. Bloodhound Knight Darrowil is an optional boss found in a spectral Evergale in Limgrave, one of the game's many imprisoned enemies, accessible through Evergale interactions. His lore, when assembled from item descriptions, connects him to a tradition of bloodhound knights who serve great lords and track down specific targets using extraordinary speed and scent-based hunting. The connection to Blood is thematic and possibly literal. Blood is Ranni's shadow, her appointed guardian and companion, who was specifically created and designated to serve her by Marika and the Two Fingers. Darrowil may represent what Bled could become, a bloodhound knight who has broken from his designated purpose and become something feral and uncontrolled. The Evergale imprisonment suggests he was sealed away for a transgression rather than a natural defeat. One possible reading is that Darrowil's fate is a shadow of the possibility that Blade's arc is building toward, a mirror of what happens to a being who is created for loyalty and then loses the anchor of that loyalty. Easter egg 59. Blade's fate and the Two Fingers mechanism. This connects directly to what actually happens to Blade later in the game. If you complete Ranni's questline, Blade is found outside Ranni's tower, maddened and hostile, and you're forced to fight and kill him. The Two Fingers installed in Blood a fail-safe mechanism, a kind of internal override that would activate if Ranni strayed too far from the Greater Will's intended plan. When Ranni completed her deviation from that plan, the failsafe triggered in Blade. He had no choice. His mind was overwritten by the mechanism. He fought you not out of malice or betrayal, but because the thing that gave him his existence and his purpose also built into him a constraint that Ranni's freedom could only resolve by destroying. Blade's death is not the result of his own failure. It is the result of the same system that made him deciding that his continued existence was no longer useful. This is possibly one of the most quietly devastating things in the entire game once you understand the full picture. Easter egg 60. Deathbird and Deathrite bird differences. The Deathbird and Deathrite Bird are related but distinct enemy types, and the distinction between them carries lore weight. Deathrite birds are associated with the Deathrite tradition, a funerary practice that predates the Golden Order's restructuring of death within the lands between. They are enormous, spectral, regal birds that oversee the transition of the dead and carry a kind of authority in the ritual of death. Death birds are a more corrupted, less organized version of the same creature type. They do not carry the same ritual authority. One reading of the difference is that Deathrite birds represent what these creatures were supposed to be, guardians and guides of the properly functioning death cycle, while death birds represent what they became after the rune of death was sealed away and their purpose was disrupted. Without a properly functioning death cycle to oversee, these beings lost their role, and with it their dignity. The death birds are what happens when a guardian loses what it was guarding. Easter egg 61. Commander O'Neill and the Outer God of Rot. Commander O'Neill is found in Caelid, the Scarlet Rot Wasteland, commanding a group of soldiers who have been infected with rot. He fights using a halberd and summons additional soldiers during the fight. His lore, while not extensively detailed, positions him as a military commander who continued to operate within Caelid even after the Scarlet Bloom devastated the region. The soldiers he commands are described as having sworn themselves to continued service despite their infection, a detail that is either deeply loyal or deeply tragic depending on your reading. O'Neill himself shows no apparent signs of corruption despite being surrounded by it, which is unusual. Whether this reflects a specific resistance to the rot, or simply that the timeline of his infestation has not progressed far enough, is not stated. What is clear is that O'Neill represents the continuation of military order in a space where all the usual reasons to maintain that order have long since collapsed. Easter egg 62. The Clean Rot Knights and Millennia's personal guard. The Clean Rot Knights are an elite group of soldiers who served specifically under Millennia and carried a purifying, resistance-based approach to the scarlet rot that infected their environment. They are found in Caelid and in the Haligtree region, and their armour and weapon designs reflect both their military function and their specific devotion to Millennia. What is notable about the Clean Rot Knights is that they appear to have actually succeeded at something most beings in the lands between could not manage, which is sustained coexistence with the scarlet rot environment without total corruption. Their discipline and their faith in Millennia seem to have provided a degree of protection. This mirrors Millennia's own relationship with the rot within her body. She is not immune to it, she is resistant to it through continuous effort. Her knights reflect this approach at a human scale, people who chose to stay close to the source of the contamination and maintain themselves through discipline rather than flee. Easter egg 63. The Kindred of Rot and their worship. The Kindred of Rot are the insectoid, rot-worshipping creatures found primarily in Celia and other rot-heavy areas. They are one of the more alien-looking enemy types in the game, with segmented bodies and a reverent posture toward rot fungi and scarlet rot manifestations. Their lore suggests that they are worshippers of the outer god of rot, the same entity whose influence manifests as scarlet rot throughout the world. Unlike the Clean Rot Knights who resist the rot, the Kindred have embraced it as divine, constructing a religious framework around the spreading corruption. Their prayers and rituals are directed toward the growth and spread of scarlet rot as a sacred act. Whether the outer god of rot is actually receiving these prayers, or whether it simply spreads indifferently, is not something the lore resolves. Outer gods in Elden Ring generally do not appear to have the kind of personal attention that the worship directed at them implies. Easter egg 64. Demi-human chiefs and the civilization beneath. The demi-human chiefs are relatively minor boss encounters that appear in coastal areas and cliff regions, leading groups of demi-humans. But the lore of the demi-humans as a species is richer than their role as enemies might suggest. Demi-humans are humanoid creatures that the Golden Order's framework has placed firmly outside the circle of grace, beings denied the guidance of the Erdtree's light. Their civilization, such as it is, exists in the margins and the wild spaces of the lands between. The demi-human chiefs wield weapons and wear crude armor, suggesting a level of social organization and craft tradition that contradicts the impression they give in combat of being purely feral. One reading of the demi-humans is that they represent what the lands between looked like before the Erdtree's order defined who counted as a person with access to its blessing. They are not primitive, they are excluded. Easter egg 65. The ulcerated tree spirit and what it is. The ulcerated tree spirit is one of the more visually striking enemy types in the game. A massive worm-like creature covered in Erdtree growth that thrashes in underground spaces. The name is important. Ulcerated. These creatures are described as the spirits of the Erdtree itself, or at least extensions of it, that have become diseased and corrupted. The Erdtree's health is not uniform throughout its body. In the underground spaces where its roots reach, there are regions where the life force has become infected or necrotic. The ulcerated tree spirits are what the Erdtree's own spiritual matter looks like when it becomes sick. Fighting them is, in a small way, fighting the Erdtree itself, or at least its diseased extensions. The fact that they drop golden seeds, the same seeds used to strengthen flasks, reinforces this. Even diseased, the Erdtree's material produces sacred outputs. Easter egg 66. The Erdtree burial watchdogs and what they watch. The Erdtree burial watchdogs are cat-like stone constructs that guard catacomb boss rooms throughout the game. They are artificial beings created specifically to watch over burial sites, and their design, which combines feline agility with stone construct solidity, reflects a specific balance of alertness and permanence. The catacomb system in Elden Ring is connected to the traditional funerary practices of the lands between, specifically the burying of soldiers and warriors in the ground, as opposed to returning them to the Erdtree's light. The watchdogs guard these spaces because the people buried in them are not in the Erdtree's keeping. They are in the earth, and the earth needs its own guardians. Whether the watchdogs were created by the Erdtree's institutional church or by an older tradition predating it is not entirely clear, but their presence in every catacomb suggests a standardized system of protection that has been in place for a very long time. Easter egg 67. The Miranda blighted blooms and the flower design. Miranda, the blighted bloom, and the Miranda flowers, found throughout the lands between, are connected to an aesthetic of beauty and toxicity that recurs in Elden Ring. The flowers are visually lovely, with enormous blooms in deep colours, and they produce toxic clouds and seeds that deal damage. They are found particularly in swamp areas and in places where death and rot have become the dominant environmental forces. The Miranda flower design can be read as a commentary on the game's broader theme of beauty and corruption coexisting, the idea that things which appear to offer life or grace are often doing the opposite. The flowers in the lands between are generally associated with the Erdtree's vitality, gold and white growth suggesting the life the tree provides. Miranda flowers are the inverted version of this, beautiful growth that consumes rather than nurtures. Easter egg 68. The Royal Revenant and the Shattering. The Royal Revenants are fast, multi-armed undead creatures found in swamp areas and specific dungeons. They are among the more unsettling enemy designs in the game, with their many arms and their aggressive, scuttling movement pattern. Their lore connects them to a form of undeath that is specifically tied to the Shattering, the war between the demigods that tore the lands. Between apart after Marika shattered the Elden Ring, Revenants are people who died during the Shattering and whose souls became trapped in a particularly violent, and incomplete form of undeath, unable to return to the Erdtree and unable to truly rest. They are animated by a compulsion to continue fighting, a residue of the violence that killed them. They are not malicious in a conscious sense. They are simply stuck endlessly reenacting the final moments of a conflict that has been over for a long time. Easter egg 69, the bell-bearing hunter and the economy of the lands between. The bell-bearing hunter is an NPC invader that appears at sites of grace after dark and aggressively targets the player. They wield large weapons and fight with murderous efficiency. Their target in the in-game lore is not the Tarnished specifically, but travelling merchants who carry bell bearings, the currency of trade in the lands between. The bell-bearing economy is the system by which the Tarnished can unlock new items from the twin husks at the Round Table hold. The bell-bearing hunter disrupts this economy by hunting and killing the merchants who carry these bell bearings, presumably to acquire them. What the hunter does with the bell bearings, or what they represent in terms of the hunter's motivation, is not stated, but the existence of an entity specifically designed to hunt the economic infrastructure of the game's merchant system is an interesting reflection of the breakdown of ordinary social and commercial life in the lands between after the shattering. Easter egg 70, the magma worm and volcanic religion. The magma worm is a large bipedal magma-breathing dragon-like creature found near volcanic regions and in certain dungeon areas. Its design is distinct from the ancient dragons of the main Dragon Communion lineage, suggesting that the magma worms are either a separate evolutionary branch or a form that certain dragons took as they developed a specific relationship with volcanic environments. What is interesting about the magma worm in lore terms is the connection to Rykard and Volcano Manor. Rykard merged with the god-devouring serpent, a creature also associated with volcanic depths. The magma worm and the god-devouring serpent share an environment and a thematic connection to the idea of destruction and consumption coming from below. The gods and the Erdtree grow upward. The things that threaten them come from underground. Easter egg 71. The falling star beast and the stars again. The full-grown falling star beast is a metallic armoured creature that is found at the top of Mount Gelmir and again underground. Its name explains its origin. It fell from a star, or something carried it from a star, to the earth. Like Astel, it is a space creature, but where Astel is alien and incomprehensible, the falling star beast reads more like an armoured organism that simply arrived somewhere it had not evolved to be. Its metallic shell and crab-like movement pattern suggest a creature designed for an environment very different from the lands between. It does not appear to have goals or awareness in the way that Astel might. It is simply a creature from elsewhere, surviving in a new environment, which incidentally involves destroying anything that gets close to it. Easter egg 72, the Dragon Communion, bosses, and what communion means. The Dragon Communion tradition is one of the most interesting spiritual systems in the game. Rather than worshipping dragons or serving them, the Dragon Communion involves literally eating parts of a dragon's heart and absorbing their power. The Dragon Communion bosses, including Agil, Smarag, Grail, and others, all drop hearts upon death that can be consumed at the Church of Dragon Communion or at the Cathedral of Dragon Communion for specific incantations. The philosophical implication of this system is that power is transferable through consumption, that the boundary between self and other is permeable in the right ritual context. This is a very different cosmology from the Golden Order, which is about maintaining and organising a fixed divine structure. The Dragon Communion dissolves the boundary between worshipper and worshipped by having the worshipper literally become the worshipped, incorporating their power through the body. It is a physical theology. Easter egg 73, Flying Dragon Agil and the first encounter. Flying Dragon Agil is the dragon that erupts from the lake in Limgrave when approached, and it is most players' first encounter with a dragon fight in the game. Argyll's presence in Dragonburnt Ruins, a location that clearly bears the marks of previous draconic activity, suggests that he is not a new arrival. He has been there for some time. The burned ruins around the lake are presumably his doing, evidence of previous territory assertion, or simply incidental damage from a very large fire-breathing creature living in and around the lake. What is easy to miss is that Argyll is specifically a member of the Dragon Communion lineage, one of the dragons who made a pact with a certain church, and whose power can be absorbed. His attack on the player is not motivated by malice in any complex sense. You are in his space. This is what he does. Easter egg 74. Elder Dragon, Grail, and the Child Dragons. Elder Dragon Grail is found in Caelid, lying inert and surrounded by her children, smaller dragons who attack the player to protect her. Grail herself is described as the oldest living dragon in the lands between, a colossal creature who no longer moves under her own power and who provides some form of sustenance or spiritual anchor to the dragon civilization around her. She drops a heart when killed, the largest dragon heart in the game, with the highest power yield for Dragon Communion. The ethical complexity of killing Grail, an ancient, passive creature who is essentially being protected by her children and who cannot fight back, is not something the game addresses directly. It is left to the player. You can kill her efficiently by attacking her while her children are elsewhere, or you can fight through all of them, or you can leave her entirely. Her passivity is not weakness, it is age. She has been here long enough that her role has become presence rather than action. Easter egg 75. The Crystalian bosses and the Eternal Cities. The Crystalians are enemies and bosses made entirely of crystal, found in underground regions and in areas with strong glintstone connections. Their lore is connected to the Eternal Cities, the underground civilizations built by the Nox people. The Crystalians are not natural creatures, but constructed ones, beings whose bodies have been replaced entirely by crystal through a process described as an extreme form of the crystal transformation that certain glintstone research enables. They were made to be permanent, unchanging, immune to the biological vulnerabilities of flesh. In one reading, they are the Nox people's attempt at achieving immortality outside the Erdtree's specific system of undeath and rebirth. They do not use the Erdtree's grace to persist. They persist because they have made themselves into rocks. The irony of this solution is that they are also completely rigid, unable to grow or change, perfect crystalline forms frozen in the moment of their completion. Easter egg 76. Battle Mage Hughes and the War Against Sorcery Traditions. Battle Mage Hughes is a boss found in the Academy of Raya Lucaria area, and he represents a specific intersection of combat and sorcery that the Academy cultivated. His design and his lore connect to the tradition of battlefield sorcerers who fought the Giants' War and other historical conflicts, using glintstone magic offensively in close quarters, rather than at range. The Academy's tradition of sorcery is generally presented as detached, academic, even elitist. Hughes is a reminder that it also produced combat pragmatists, soldiers who use the same glintstone knowledge in the blood and chaos of actual warfare. His presence in the Academy area after death as a hostile spirit suggests that the Academy's ghosts are not all scholars and students. Some of them were warriors. Easter egg 77. Onyx Lord and Alabaster Lord as Falling Star creatures. The Onyx Lord and Alabaster Lord are humanoid bosses that wield gravity magic, and they share a lineage with the Falling Star beasts. All three are explicitly associated with celestial origin, beings that came from the stars or were created using star-derived materials. The Onyx and Alabaster Lords are more clearly humanoid than the Falling Star beast, which raises the possibility that they represent a more developed form, perhaps a form that has had more time to adapt to or been shaped by the world they arrived in. The gravity magic they use connects them to Radan, whose own gravity sorcery is described as having been inspired by study of the stars. One possible reading is that Radan encountered these beings, or their tradition, and learned from it, incorporating the gravitational power of stellar objects into his own magical practice. Easter egg 78, the Godfrey Shade and the arena design. The arena where you fight the Godfrey Shade in Leyndell is the throne room of the Erd Tree, and it is covered in golden tree roots, an ancient stone that suggests extreme age. The design of the arena communicates something important. This is not a place that was built to accommodate Godfrey's presence. It is a place where his presence left marks that have never been erased. The worn stone, the golden patina on everything, the specific dimensions of the space, all of it suggests that Godfrey occupied this space so completely and for so long that the architecture adapted to him rather than the other way around. His shade appearing here is not an arbitrary location choice. He is in the place that most strongly retains his imprint, the space that knew him longest and remembers him best. Easter egg 79. The putrid avatar and what putrefaction means. The putrid avatar is a version of the Erd Tree avatar found in the consecrated snowfield area, and unlike its counterparts elsewhere, it has been corrupted by scarlet rot. The Erd Tree avatars are protectors of minor Erd Trees, extensions of the main Erd Tree's body that provide grace in distant regions. The fact that one of these extensions has been corrupted by scarlet rot is significant. It suggests that the scarlet rot is not merely an environmental contamination from Malenia's bloom at Caelid. It has spread further than that, reaching the sacred spaces associated directly with the Erd Tree's body. The putrid avatar is a sign that the Erd Tree itself is not immune to the outer god of rot's influence, that the fundamental power sustaining life in the lands between has rot growing inside it. Easter egg 80. The Esgar, Priest of Blood encounter. Esgar, Priest of Blood, is found in the Leyndell catacombs, along with the Moog, the Omen encounter. Esgar is a priest who has devoted herself to the Formless Mother, the same outer god that Moog serves, and her presence in the catacombs beneath the capital suggests that Moog's blood cult had established a foothold in the underground spaces of Leyndell proper. The capital's catacombs, a place meant for the respectful burial of the dead, has been used as a site of blood worship, a detail that is consistent with the idea of Moog's cult operating in the margins and the hidden spaces of the empire. Esgar is not a major lore figure, but her location is. She represents the underground reach of the Formless Mother's influence, literally underground in the space beneath the capital's feet. Easter egg 81. The Erd Tree avatars and the flask of wondrous physic. The Erd Tree avatars drop wondrous physic tears when killed, items used to customize the flask of wondrous physic, a unique consumable. The connection between avatar drops and the physic flask is worth dwelling on. The avatars are extensions of the Erd Tree's body, and the tears they drop are crystallized essence of the Erd Tree's grace. The flask of wondrous physic is associated with the Erd Tree as well, described as having been made from a vessel filled with tears wept by the Erd Tree. The entire system of the physic flask, mixing tears to customize its effect, can be understood as a ritual of communion with the Erd Tree through its grief. The tree has been weeping. Its tears have specific properties. You collect and combine those tears to enhance yourself. It is an unusual image, simultaneously tender and functional. Easter egg 82. Moog, the Omen, versus Moog, Lord of Blood. There are two Moog fights in the game, one in the Leyndell sewers as Moog, the Omen, and one in the Mohgwyn Palace as Moog, Lord of Blood. The first is significantly weaker, and both are the same being, but the difference between the two encounters reflects Moog's progression. The sewer fight is with Mog before he fully accepted the formless mother's power, and before he orchestrated the theft of Michaela's cocoon. He is powerful, but not yet the culmination of his own ambitions. The palace fight is with Mog at the height of what he has built, surrounded by the blood lake and the mass of corrupted followers and the sleeping cocoon. The aesthetic difference between the two arenas, the dirty stone sewer versus the crimson lake under a bloody sky, is the material difference between what Mog was and what he made himself into. He did not just receive power, he constructed a world for it to live in. Easter egg 83. Millicent and the Clean Rot Night Fight. Millicent is an NPC met in Caelid who is afflicted with scarlet rot and carries one of the Valkyrie arms that descend from Melania. Her questline ultimately resolves in either her death or her merging with the scarlet rot fully. But along the way, if you complete her questline in a specific direction, you fight Clean Rot Knights as part of her personal boss encounter. These knights are fighting to claim the needle that Millicent carries, the unalloyed gold needle that was used to suppress her rot. The Clean Rot Knight encounter in her questline represents the tension between Melania's legacy, specifically the rot-suppressing discipline that Melania represents, and the rot's desire to spread and claim those who carry it. The knights, paradoxically, represent the part of Melania's tradition that seeks to keep rot contained, while also being the instrument through which that needle and that containment might be taken. Easter egg 84. The Volcano Manor Assassinations and Tanith. Volcano Manor operates as a questline hub where you're asked to hunt and kill various targets across the lands between. Tanith, the woman who runs the manor, frames these assassinations as a service to Rykard, who she is devoted to with an intensity that borders on the theological. The targets you're given, when examined carefully, all share a connection to the Golden Order or to the enemies of Rykard's specific brand of blasphemy. This is not a random murder-for-hire operation. It is a targeted campaign against the Order's servants and supporters. Tanith's devotion to Rykard is reciprocal in the sense that she genuinely believes in his project, the destruction of the Divine Order through the accumulation of God-devouring power. She is not simply loyal to a person, she is loyal to an idea, and the assassinations are how that idea is made material. Easter egg 85. What happens to Tanith after Rykard's death? If you kill Rykard and then return to Tanith, you find her eating Rykard's corpse. She is consuming the remains of the God-devouring serpent, kneeling in the blood and matter of the thing she loved, consuming it. This is an extraordinary moment that the game presents without commentary. She does not stop when you enter. She does not explain herself. She simply continues eating. One reading of this is that Tanith is attempting to continue Rykard's project herself, to carry his blasphemous power forward through literal incorporation. Another reading is that it is grief made physical, an act of union with the being she served, a refusal to be separated from him even by death. A third reading is that the act is itself a kind of ritual completion of the God-devouring serpent's purpose, the eating of what had been devouring from the inside out. Whatever the reading, it is one of the most memorable single images in a game full of remarkable images. Easter egg 86. The Godric Soldier and the Storm Aesthetics. The soldiers in Stormvale Castle wear armour that reflects the storm aesthetic associated with Godric's domain. Heavy, battered armour covered in the marks of weather and warfare. This is consistent with Stormvale's location, which is coastal and windswept. But the storm aesthetic carries an additional meaning that connects Stormvale to the Storm King, a figure in previous From Software lore who wielded storm and wind as expressions of primal power. The name Stormvale itself suggests a barrier against or connection to storm, and Godric's grafted weapons include techniques that generate wind and storm force. Whether Godric deliberately cultivated this aesthetic or inherited it from the castle he took over is not entirely clear. What is clear is that the connection between the wind and storm aesthetic and a figure of desperate, blustering violence is not accidental. Easter egg 87. The ulcerated tree spirit in the lava area. There is an ulcerated tree spirit found in the lava pits of Mount Gelmir, which is unusual because the creature is associated with the Erd tree's underground root system rather than volcanic environments. Its presence in the volcano region raises the question of how it got there and what the Erd tree's roots are doing in a volcanic mountain. One reading is that the Erd tree's root system is more extensive than is immediately apparent, reaching even into geological extremes to establish the Golden Order's presence. Another reading is that this particular tree spirit has been driven there by the disruption of its normal environment, displaced from wherever it was originally lodged by the violence of the shattering. A third reading, simpler and perhaps more likely, is that the Erd tree's spiritual matter has been growing into unusual spaces since the shattering disrupted its normal functioning, and the tree spirit in the volcano is simply a symptom of that disruption. Easter egg 88. Sir Gideon's knowledge of Miquella. During his pre-fight dialogue, Gideon mentions Miquella and does so in a way that implies he knows more about Miquella's situation than almost anyone else. He says that some destination should not be reached, a line that can be read as a reference specifically to Mogwyn Palace and to Miquella's cocoon. The question of how Gideon learned about this is not answered. He describes himself as the all-knowing, and his information-gathering network is implied to be very extensive. But knowing about Miquella's location and Mog's plan is a significant intelligence feat given how deeply hidden the Mogwyn Palace is. Whether Gideon had operatives in the palace, or whether he deduced the situation through accumulated information, the fact that he knew and chose not to act on it is consistent with his ultimate paralysis. He gathered knowledge and decided it pointed toward inaction. He had the information that could have led someone else to save Miquella and used it to justify standing still. Easter egg 89. The Dragonkin Soldier and the Nox. The Dragonkin soldiers are large, bipedal dragon-adjacent creatures found primarily in underground bodies of water. They serve the Nox people of the Eternal Cities, acting as soldiers and guardians for those underground civilizations. The connection between the Dragonkin soldiers and the Nox is interesting because the Nox are explicitly a people who rejected or were rejected by the above-ground power structure. They built their cities underground and developed their own traditions independently of the Erd Tree and the Golden Order. Using Dragonkin as soldiers is consistent with a civilization that cultivated its own alternative to every above-ground institution, including its own relationship with draconic power that operates entirely outside the Dragon Communion system of the surface world. Easter egg 90. The Crucible Knight Siluria and her lance. Crucible Knight Siluria is a unique Crucible Knight boss found in the Deeproot depths, and she wields a lance instead of the more common sword and shield loadout of standard Crucible Knights. Her item drops include Siluria's Tree, the lance itself, which is described as a weapon made from a branch of the old Crucible. The lance made from a Crucible branch is a remarkable image, taking the organic material of the primordial state of life and crafting it into a weapon. It suggests that the Crucible Knights were not just using incantations that evoked the Crucible, but actually working with its physical remnants as a material for their equipment. The distinction matters because it positions the Crucible Knights not as practitioners of a historical tradition, but as custodians of physical relics from that time, beings who have maintained a direct material connection to an age that the world has largely moved past. Easter egg 91. The Stone Digger Troll and what he was digging. The Stone Digger Troll appears in the Limgrave tunnels and in the Old Altus tunnel, and his name implies that he was employed in mining before becoming hostile. Trolls in Elden Ring are not simply monsters, They are beings that were used by the various civilizations of the lands between as labor, specifically for the heavy digging and lifting work that constructing underground tunnels and mining operations required. The Stone Digger Trolls are named for their function. They are the labor force. The fact that they are now hostile, attacking anyone who enters their tunnels, is consistent with what has happened across the lands between after the shattering. The systems of society and labor that defined the pre-shattering world have broken down. The trolls no longer have employers or instructions, or the social context that kept them oriented. They simply defend the space they have always occupied. Easter egg 92. The Dragon Apostle Churches, and what Dragon Communion actually is. The Church of Dragon Communion and the Cathedral of Dragon Communion are the two sites where Dragon Communion incantations can be purchased. The people who established these churches made a specific theological commitment, which is that the boundary between human and dragon is not fixed, that it is possible and even sacred to bridge the two through the consumption of dragon essence. This theology predates the Golden Order and was presumably practiced in the age when dragons and humans coexisted more openly. The Golden Order does not openly suppress dragon communion in the same way it suppresses the godskin tradition, but the existence of dedicated churches outside the main institutional structure of the Erd Tree suggests that dragon communion is a parallel and somewhat outside tradition, practiced by those who have chosen an alternative to the Erd Tree's specific cosmological framework. Easter egg 93. Radagon as a separate person from Marika. This is a piece of lore that the game reveals in its final moments, and that retroactively changes how you read everything that came before it. Radagon and Marika are the same being, two personalities or aspects inhabiting a single divine body. The implications of this are enormous. Radagon leaving Renala to marry Marika was Radagon marrying himself. Every demigod child attributed to Radagon and Marika is a child of the same being with itself, though mediated through actual other individuals like Renala and the male aspect's relationship to the female aspect. The Elden Ring, which was constructed and then shattered by Marika, was also the thing that Radagon spent his later existence trying to repair, working from within toward restoration, while his other self had broken it. The philosophical implications of a single divine being at war with itself are what the entire game is about once you know this detail. Every conflict in the lands between is, in one reading, an externalization of Marika Radagon's internal division. Easter egg 94. The Elden Beast and what it is. The final boss of the game is the Elden Beast, the physical form of the Elden Ring itself, or rather, the Greater Will's instrument that carries the Elden Ring within it. When Radagon is defeated, the Elden Beast emerges from his body, large and cosmic, swimming through a golden space. It is not evil in a conventional sense. It is an agent carrying out a cosmological function, the continuation of the Greater Will's order in the lands between. Its design, which incorporates star maps, flowing golden energy, and enormous scale, communicates that it is something that originated outside the world rather than within it. The Elden Ring is not native to the lands between. It was brought there. The Elden Beast brought it. And the fight at the end of the game is ultimately with the entity that has been the source of the world's organizing principle from the very beginning, long before any of the characters you have met were born. Easter egg 95. The Elden Beast's star map body. The patterns on the Elden Beast's body, if you look at them during the fight, resemble actual star charts. There are specific constellation patterns visible on its hide. This connects to the game's persistent motif of stars as signs, prophecy, and destiny. The two fingers read the stars. The destined death prophecy is connected to celestial events. Radan fought to hold the stars still. Rani's questline is fundamentally about redirecting what the stars signal. The Elden Beast carrying the stars within itself suggests that the Greater Will's plan for the lands between is written in the sky, that the cosmological order being enforced by the Erd tree and its institutions is not an organic growth but a script being followed, with the Elden Beast as both the author and the page. Easter egg 96, Radagon's hammer and the cracks in the Elden Ring. Radagon wields a hammer in the fight against him, and his attempts to repair the Elden Ring were conducted using a hammer. The item description for his hammer and for related weapons in the Golden Order tradition connects hammering to a specific metaphor of construction and reconstruction, of taking something broken and trying to force the pieces back into coherence through applied force rather than through understanding why they broke. Radagon spent enormous effort trying to repair the Elden Ring, but the repair process itself may have contributed to the instability. Hammering cracks together does not make the material stronger. It can widen the fracture. One reading of Radagon's obsessive repair work is that it represents the fundamental incompatibility of his own dual nature with the task he set himself. The being who shattered the ring is also the being trying to fix it. The hammer is both the problem and the attempted solution. Easter egg 97. The ancestor spirit and the role of the stag. The stag is a recurring image in Elden Ring. The ancestor spirit takes a stag form. The rune bear, which is another significant underground creature, has decorative stag symbolism in some versions. The stag appears in funerary art and in the underground city's iconography. In many world mythologies, the stag represents transition, specifically the crossing between states of being, between life and death, between worlds. Its antlers, which branch like trees, echo the Erd tree's own branching structure. But the stag version of this branching is natural rather than divine in the institutionalized sense. The stag as a spiritual figure in the underground suggests an alternative cosmological framework where the transition between life and death is managed by a natural force rather than a divine institution, a forest spirit rather than a golden tree. The fact that this tradition persists underground, away from the Erd tree's reach, suggests it was never fully displaced by the Golden Order. It simply retreated to places the Order did not fully control. Easter egg 98, Regal Ancestor Spirit's Arena and the Silver Tears. The Regal Ancestor Spirit is fought in Nokron, the Eternal City, and the arena it occupies is an enormous indoor space within the city's structure. The Silver Tears, which are enemies encountered throughout the Eternal Cities, are fluid creatures that can transform into imitations of other beings. Their nature, as mimics and shapeshifters, connects to the Nox people's cosmological project, which involved attempting to create their own version of the divine, their own Elden Ring analogue. The Silver Tears may represent a partially successful or failed version of that project. Beings created in imitation of divine life that lack the specific organizing principle they were designed to carry. They are copies of the idea of life rather than life itself. The Regal Ancestor Spirit's presence in the same city as these creatures creates an interesting juxtaposition between a genuine, natural spiritual force and the Nox's artificially created spiritual simulacra. Easter egg 99. Astal in the underground lake and the cosmological invasion. The fact that Astal is found underground, in the deepest parts of the underground lake system, is significant. It fell through the sky and hit the ground, and then presumably continued downward or was brought downward to its current location over time. Its placement underground, surrounded by the ruins of a civilization, suggests that its arrival had consequences that went far beyond the initial impact. The Nox civilizations that were already underground experienced Astal's arrival as a catastrophic event, an invasion by an entity that was entirely outside their cosmological understanding. One reading of the underground lake area is that it represents the aftermath of a collision not just between a creature and the Earth, but between two cosmological systems. Astal's void-based existence is incompatible with the Nox's attempt to build a coherent underground civilization. Its presence there is still disruptive, still actively hostile, still an ongoing problem that has not been resolved in the time since it arrived. Easter egg 100. The Fire Giants' history and the war against the Giants. The war between the Golden Order and the Giants is one of the most significant historical events in the game's backstory, and the Fire Giant is the last survivor of the losing side. The Giants were the original custodians of the Flame of Ruin, and their war with the Golden Order was specifically about this flame, which threatened the Erd Tree. Marika led or directed the campaign that broke the Giants, and the last Fire Giant was chained rather than killed as a contingency. What is worth noting about this history is that the Giants' relationship with the Flame of Ruin was described as a form of guardianship rather than malicious intent. They kept the flame because it was theirs to keep, a sacred element of their civilization rather than a weapon they had built to destroy the Erd Tree. The Golden Order's campaign against the Giants can be read as a preemptive strike against a people who posed a potential threat rather than an actual one. The Giant was chained not as punishment for aggression, but as insurance against a possible future action. The moral weight of this history sits heavily on the Fire Giant encounter. Easter egg 101. Fortisax's lightning and the Ancient Pact. Fortisax fights with two-pronged lightning attacks that are specifically associated with the draconic thunder tradition, and they have a different quality from the lightning used by other dragon-adjacent enemies in the game. The thunder of the ancient dragons is described in item descriptions as a power that predates the Golden Order's specific framework of holy lightning, which is associated with Godfrey and Radagon. Ancient dragon lightning is an older form of elemental power, connected to the primordial world before the Erd Tree organized everything into its current hierarchical system. When Fortisax uses this lightning in the fight, he is drawing on something that has essentially been superseded by the current cosmological order. He is using an outdated power in a world that has moved on from it. The melancholy of that image mirrors his entire situation, a loyal ancient being fighting with old tools in a world that has been transformed past the point of recognition. Easter egg 102. The Night of the Black Knives and the Missing Shard. The Night of the Black Knives involved using a shard of the Rune of Death that was taken from Malekith's keeping. How this shard was obtained is one of the great mysteries of the game's lore. Malekith's whole existence is devoted to guarding the Rune of Death and preventing its use. The idea that someone was able to take a fragment of it without him stopping them, or even apparently knowing until after the fact, implies either that Malekith was deceived, that he was complicit, or that the theft occurred during a period when his attention was occupied elsewhere. Various lore theories have been proposed, including the possibility that Ranni herself engineered a distraction, or that the theft was facilitated by someone within Malekith's own circle. The game does not resolve this question, but the fact that it remains unresolved is itself meaningful. The most secure guardian in the lands between failed to protect the one thing he was made to protect, and the reason why is never definitively explained. Easter egg 103. Ancient Dragon Landseax and her connection to the Crucible. Ancient Dragon Landseax is a dragon boss found in Altus Plateau, and she is specifically described as an ancient dragon who made a pact with the Golden Order during the Ancient Era. Her design and her attacks connect her to the Crucible era rather than the more recent Dragon Communion tradition. She uses lightning, which is the classical draconic power of the Ancient Era, rather than fire or rot or other elemental affinities. Her presence in Altus, close to the capital but not within it, can be read as the presence of a very old agreement being honoured in proximity to the civilization that made the agreement. She was not absorbed into the Golden Order's institutional structure, but she is near it. One reading is that ancient dragons like Lansiaks represent a neutral or allied presence that the Golden Order benefited from without fully incorporating, beings whose power was useful to have nearby without requiring them to submit to the Order's specific theological framework. Easter egg 104. The Rune Bear and its specific location. The Rune Bear is an enemy type found in several caves and in the open world, a massive bear-like creature with runes inscribed in its fur or skin. The rune connection is interesting because runes in Elden Ring are the fundamental currency of power in the world, fragments of divine energy that accumulate in beings and objects. A creature with runes literally written into its body suggests something unusual about its origin or its relationship to the divine system. It might represent an animal that has been exposed to an extraordinary concentration of rune energy and been physically transformed by it. Or it might represent something more deliberate, a creature that was modified or created in a process that imprinted rune energy directly onto its form. The Rune Bear's behaviour, which is unusually aggressive and wide-ranging compared to the other bears in the game, might be explained by the disruption that this rune imprinting causes to whatever normal ursine cognition they might have had. Easter egg 105. The grafted scion and multiple bodies. The grafted scion that kills you at the start of the game is specifically a smaller, more maneuverable version of the grafting concept that Godric exemplifies. Where Godric has grafted the limbs of specific warriors onto his own existing body in a relatively organized way, the grafted scion is a more radical construction, a being assembled from multiple complete bodies rather than selectively adding parts to one. The extra arms, the multiple heads, the general horror of the design, it all suggests a process taken further than Godric himself has pushed it. Some lore readers suggest that the grafted scions represent an attempt to create the perfect soldier through grafting, a being that is simply all of the best parts assembled together without the limitation of a single original body. The result is not perfection, it is a nightmare, which may be the point. Easter egg 106. The Gargoyle Duo and their guardian purpose. The Blackblade Kindred are large gargoyle-like constructs found at specific sacred locations, particularly at the gate leading to Farum Azula and at the Forbidden Lands near the mountaintops. They carry Malekith-adjacent weapons and fighting styles, which suggests they were created as an extension of Malekith's guardian function. If Malekith is the guardian of the Rune of Death, these gargoyles are the outer guard, protecting the approaches to spaces that are connected to Malekith's purpose. The combination of a halberd and a great sword that the duo boss version uses is notable because it requires two different beings fighting in coordination, suggesting that these constructs were not just individually made, but designed to work in tandem. Paired guardians for paired threats. The threshold they protect, the gate to Farum Azula, is appropriate for that level of investment, given what Farum Azula contains. Easter egg 107. Malekith's arena and the crumbling design. The arena where you fight Malekith at the end of Farum Azula is a space that is actively falling apart during the fight. Sections of the floor collapse. The architecture crumbles in real time. This is not incidental. Farum Azula exists in a temporal anomaly and has been in a state of arrested collapse for an indeterminate amount of time. When Malekith dies and the Rune of Death is released, the collapse resumes. You are watching the building finally finish falling while you fight its guardian. The crumbling arena is the fight's own ending, coming into view while the fight is still happening. One reading of this is that Farum Azula has been held in suspension specifically by the same force that Malekith has been containing, and that the release of death energy from the Rune of Death is both what kills Malekith and what unfreezes the ruins he has been guarding. Easter egg 108. What happens in Leyndell after Malekith? After you kill Malekith and the Rune of Death is released, Leyndell, the royal capital, changes into Leyndell, Ashen capital. The Erd tree has burned, the golden leaves have become ash, and the city that was defined by the living Erd tree is now defined by the same tree's burned remains. This transformation is one of the most dramatic environmental changes in any From Software game, and it happens between 2 sessions, between one loading screen and the next, making its impact genuinely shocking. But the lore implication is that this was always coming. Marika's plan, insofar as it can be reconstructed, required the Erd tree to burn. She had been building toward this. The fire giant was preserved specifically to ignite the tree at the right moment. The Ashen Capital is not a tragedy, or at least not purely one. It is the next step in a plan that has been in motion since before any of the characters in the game were born. That does not make it less devastating to see. Easter egg 109, Malenia's waterfowl dance and the specific motion. Malenia's most famous attack, the waterfowl dance, is a sequence of slashes and lunges that is widely considered one of the most difficult attack patterns in From Software's catalogue. But the visual design of the attack carries character information. The motion is described and looks like a dance, which is consistent with Malenia's fighting style being described across her lore as refined to the point of artistry. She's been practicing combat since childhood, and the waterfowl dance is what happens when someone with preternatural talent dedicates their entire life, a life that has been defined by pain and limitation, to the one thing they can do without the limitations of their body reducing them. She blooms when she fights in a metaphorical sense before she blooms in the literal second phase sense. The dance is the most beautiful thing in the game that also wants you dead, and this balance is deliberate. Easter egg 110. Placidusax's eternal weight and the crumbling beast. When you reach Dragonlord Placidusax through the hidden sleeping spot in Farum Azula, he is lying in a sleeping position that mirrors the position the player must adopt to access his arena. This symmetry is not accidental. You lie down as he lies down. You enter his space by adopting his posture. One reading of this is that the act of access is itself a form of communion, an acknowledgement of his state. He is waiting. By lying down to reach him, you are briefly entering the same posture of waiting. This is a small design decision, easily missed, but it creates an unusual intimacy between the player and Placidusax before the fight even begins. You have shown that you understand, on some level, what it means to wait. Easter egg 111. Renala and the full moon tradition. Renala is specifically Queen of the Full Moon, and this title connects her to a specific magical tradition within the Academy, the full moon sorceries. These spells call down, or channel, the power of the full moon as a magical energy source. The full moon tradition within the Academy is one of its oldest and most powerful branches. Renala's mastery of this tradition made her the most powerful sorcerer in the institution's history, and the full moon is literally present as a summoned object in her second phase fight. What is interesting about the full moon as a magical concept is that it is associated with cycles, specifically the cycling of light as reflected power rather than generated power. The moon does not produce light, it reflects the sun's light. The full moon sorceries are, in one reading, about borrowing and reflecting rather than generating, about channeling power that comes from elsewhere and making it your own. After Radagon left her, this tradition, the channeling of reflected light, took on an additional dimension. Renala is still receiving his light, in a sense. She is still working within a framework he helped to establish. She's not been able to break from it. Easter egg 112. The Godskins and the Gloam-eyed Queen. The Gloam-eyed Queen is never seen in the game, never fought, never directly encountered. She is referenced only in item descriptions and lore texts, but she is one of the most significant, absent figures in the entire game. She ruled over death as a power distinct from the Erd Tree's framework. She commanded the Godskin cult, and she was defeated and imprisoned by Malekith on behalf of Marika before the game's events. What the Gloam-eyed Queen's specific cosmological vision was What she believed death should be, and how it should function, is not fully articulated. But her existence and her defeat suggest that the current system for handling death in the lands between, the Erd Tree's grace, the cycling of souls, the sealing of the rune of death, is not the only system that was possible. She had an alternative. Marika eliminated it. The Godskin apostles and nobles who appear throughout the game are the remnants of a defeated cosmological tradition, the survivors of an alternative path for the world that was violently closed. Easter egg 113. What Rykard's dialogue reveals about the greater will. Rykard's invitation to join him during the fight is not purely theatrical. He raises specific points about the greater will's relationship with the beings of the lands between that the lore elsewhere supports. He suggests that the Tarnished's return to the lands between, their guidance by grace, is not a benevolent act but a utilitarian one, that the greater will sends Tarnished back to the world to serve its purposes, rather than out of any concern for the Tarnished themselves. This is not demonstrably false. The two fingers give no indication of caring about the Tarnished as individuals. They are tools for restoring the Elden Ring. Rykard sees this clearly, and his response to seeing it is to build an alternative, a god-eating tradition that accumulates power outside the greater will's framework. Whether his alternative is better or just differently terrible is a question the game leaves open. But he is not wrong in his analysis. He is just answering a real problem with a solution that most people would find unacceptable. Easter egg 114. The connection between Godric and Godfrey's birthplace. Godric comes from a line of warriors from the lands between's outer regions, the same regions where Godfrey himself originated before he was elevated to Elden Lord. Godfrey was not from the capital or from the Golden Order's institutional centre. He was a chieftain from a distant land, a warrior whose strength earned him Marika's attention. Godric's lineage thus traces back to the same geographical and cultural origin as the first Elden Lord. But where Godfrey's strength was genuine and undeniable, Godric's is borrowed, assembled from others, a simulacrum of the power his ancestor actually possessed. The comparison between them is not just ironic, it is the game's statement about what happens when a tradition of strength becomes a tradition of inheritance. Godfrey's strength was personal, Godric's is acquired. The difference between those two things is the difference between their fates. Easter egg 115. The ancient hero of Zamor and the Ice Warriors. The ancient hero of Zamor is a boss found in several Evergales, representing a warrior from the Zamor civilization, which was a pre-Golden Order society known for its ice magic and its warrior traditions. The Zamor warriors are connected to the fell god of the fire giants through an ancient pact which makes their presence in Evergale prisons interesting, since Evergales are generally used to contain beings who transgressed against the Golden Order in some way. One reading is that the Zamoran Warriors Association with the fire giants' tradition was itself considered a transgression, something the Golden Order imprisoned them for after the war against the giants. They are caught in the same net as their former allies without having been directly responsible for the same threat. The Evergale becomes a metaphor for collective punishment, beings imprisoned not for their own specific actions, but for their cultural proximity to a defeated enemy. Easter egg 116. The Leonine Misbegotten and Misbegotten lore. The Leonine Misbegotten is one of the first boss encounters for players who explore the Weeping Peninsula, a lion-headed humanoid creature found on a beach. The Misbegotten as a race are humanoid beings with animal features, considered cursed or abominated by the Golden Order and denied its grace. They are enslaved in Volcano Manor, used as labour by Godric's forces, and generally exist at the absolute margins of the lands between social hierarchy. The Leonine Misbegotten on the beach is not presented with extended context. It is simply a powerful creature that attacks you, but the knowledge that the Misbegotten are a displaced and oppressed people, rather than simply a race of monsters, changes how the encounter reads. This is not a monster guarding treasure. It is a member of an excluded people, defending a space that might be the only place it has that is its own. Easter egg 117. Perfumer Trisha and the Misbegotten Warrior duo. Perfumer Trisha and the Misbegotten Warrior are fought together in an underground area, and the pair is unusual because they appear to represent an alliance, or at minimum a companionship between a human and a misbegotten. Perfumer Trisha uses alchemical incantations based on fragrant oils and volatile compounds, and the misbegotten warrior fights beside her. The combination of a human practitioner of an unusual art tradition and a misbegotten fighter, both defending the same space and fighting as a unit, suggests a relationship that exists outside the normal social structure of the lands between, where a human and a misbegotten would not normally be considered equals. This is a small detail, and the pair is not a major lore figure, but their existence together as a fighting unit is a gentle indication that alternatives to the Golden Order's social hierarchy existed and continue to exist in the margins of the world. Easter egg 118. Elimer's bell-bearing of connection. When you kill Elimer of the Briar, he drops the Briar Great Blade, his weapon, and the bell-bearing for abandoned caves crafting materials. Bell bearings in general represent the transferred ability to obtain goods from a merchant's stock after their death. What is interesting about the bell-bearing mechanic in relation to Elimer is what it implies about his life. He was a collector, someone who accumulated specific items and goods, and even in death a trace of what he accumulated can be accessed. The bell bearings are a kind of afterlife for commerce, a system for ensuring that whatever was held in life continues to be accessible after death. In Elimer's case, it is a small detail, but it connects him to the broader economic and social disruption of the shattering in an indirect way. Easter egg 119. The putrid crystallian in Elphael. The putrid crystallian is found in Elphael, Brace of the Halig Tree, infected with scarlet rot, like many of the other inhabitants of that location. A crystallian, which is a being that has replaced its entire body with crystal specifically to transcend biological vulnerability, corrupted by scarlet rot, is a striking image. The crystal body that was supposed to be immune to everything has been compromised by a rot that apparently does not recognize the difference between biological and crystalline tissue as meaningful. The putrid crystallian's corruption suggests that the scarlet rot is more fundamental and more thorough than any physical attempt at imperviousness can address. Whatever you build your body from, the rot can find a way in. This is consistent with the theme of the Halig Tree as a whole, a sacred space built as a refuge that is being consumed by the same force it was meant to shelter people from. Easter egg 120. Godwyn the Golden and his appearance in Deeproot Depths. Godwyn is not a boss. He is not even really a character you interact with in any conventional sense. But his presence in the Deeproot Depths is one of the most visually strange and lore-significant things in the game. His body has spread through the root system, becoming enormous, his face appearing on giant masses of root and flesh that have grown through the underground. He is neither fully alive nor fully dead, his soul gone, but his body continuing to grow and spread in the absence of the death that should have completed his transformation. The body without a soul, in the cosmology of Elden Ring, is a specific tragedy. The Erd Tree normally receives souls and provides for the gradual composting of bodies back into the world. Godwyn's soul was killed without his body dying, which broke this process entirely. His body has been trying to complete a process that cannot be completed, growing without direction, without purpose, without an animating spirit to give it shape. The result is one of the most tragic images of meaningless continuation in the game. Easter egg 121. The scion of the Erd Tree and what it guards. The tree sentinels are connected to a broader tradition of Erd tree adjacent guardianship, but there are also larger entities associated with this tradition that appear in different contexts. The ulcerated tree spirits can be read as the Erd tree's own organic extension, gone wrong, but the distinction between the Erd tree's active guardianship and its passive extension is worth examining. The active guardians, tree sentinels, Erd tree avatars, are external beings appointed to the role. The passive extensions, the tree spirits, are the tree itself. When the active guardians become hostile to you, it is because they are following instructions. When the passive extensions become hostile, it is because the tree itself is responding to invasion. The distinction matters for how you read the morality of fighting them. You can argue with the logic of a guardian. You cannot argue with the immune response of a wounded organism. Easter egg 122. Bloodhound's Fang and Darrywill's connection to Bled. When you kill Darrywill and acquire the Bloodhound's Fang, the item description describes it as a curved blade of exceptional quality, crafted from the claws of a bloodhound knight. This is literally Darrywill's claw, made into a weapon you can use. The process of crafting weapons from the remains of the defeated is established in other places in the game, but it takes on a specific resonance when you consider that Darrywill might be a mirror of Bled's potential fate. Bled ultimately also goes mad and must be killed. If you were to craft a weapon from Bled's remains, would it not be something similar? A blade made from the claws of someone who was created to be loyal and then broke in the specific way that beings created for loyalty break when the object of that loyalty is no longer there. The Bloodhound's Fang is a weapon that functions by association. It is Darrywill's power, accessed through his death, which is its own kind of sadness. Easter egg 123. The Giant's Prayer Book and what the Giants worshipped. The Giant's Prayer Book, acquired from a boss in the mountaintops area, contains incantations associated with the fire giants and their religious tradition. The prayers in this book call down fire from above rather than generating it from within, which distinguishes the giant religion from the pyromancy tradition more generally. The giants understood fire as something that came from the sky, from a divine source above, and their prayers were about channeling it downward. This is consistent with the Flame of Ruins lore, which suggests the flame was a sacred thing that the giants kept and managed rather than created. They were custodians of a fire that was already there, maintaining a relationship with it rather than wielding it as a weapon. The prayer book surviving as a pickable item usable by the player is the game's way of making that tradition accessible. You can pray in the giant's way. Whether anyone hears it is another question. Easter egg 124. Renala's amber egg and what it might contain. The amber egg that Renala cradles in her second phase fight has been a source of extensive lore debate. The item descriptions around the egg mention that Renala began making it, or was given it after Radagon's departure, and that she has been working on it since. The amber material is associated with preservation, with things suspended within it being held out of normal time's reach. One theory in the lore community is that the egg contains a rebirth project, an attempt by Renala to recreate something using her art of rebirthing. What that something might be varies by theory. Some suggest she is trying to hatch a new version of Miquella, or a new version of Radagon, or simply a new form of life unrelated to her grief. Whatever it contains, it has not worked yet. The creatures summoned from it during the fight, the malformed and half-formed things, suggest the process is ongoing but not successful. Renala has had what may be an indefinite amount of time to work on this, and it still is not right. Easter egg 125. The Elden Beast's prayer motion and the greater will. In the Elden Beast fight, there is a specific moment where the creature adopts a posture that some players have described as prayer-like, a reaching upward gesture with its full body. This motion is unusual in a boss that otherwise moves with oceanic grandeur. One reading of this gesture is that even the Elden Beast, the physical vessel of the Elden Ring itself, is directing some form of attention or deference toward something beyond itself, specifically toward the greater will that it serves. The greater will is never shown, it is never heard, it is only referenced through its agents. The Elden Beast looking upward might be the closest the game comes to acknowledging the greater will's presence directly, not as a figure you can encounter, but as the direction of attention of the most powerful entity in the world. You fight the agent of the greater will. The greater will itself is somewhere else, not looking. Easter egg 126, Millicent's arm and the grace of gold. Millicent has one arm that is different from her others, a Valkyrie arm that carries Malenia's specific power. This arm was given to her as part of her connection to Malenia, who is either her mother in a biological or spiritual sense depending on how you read the rebirth lore. The arm glows faintly with gold, which is unusual because Malenia's power is associated with scarlet rot rather than gold. The gold in the arm is the unalloyed gold needle's influence, the suppressive force that keeps the rot at bay. Millicent's arm is a visual representation of the balance she maintains, gold and rot present in the same body, held in suspension by will and by specific intervention. Her entire existence is the microcosm of the situation Malenia has lived her whole life. The Valkyrie arm is the reminder that Millicent is not just connected to Malenia. She might be Malenia, or at least a part of her, reshaped. Easter egg 127. The Cleanrot Knight Finley and her achievement. Cleanrot Knight Finley is mentioned in item descriptions as having performed one of the most remarkable acts of loyalty and endurance in the game's lore. After Malenia fell into dormancy following the Scarlet Bloom at Caelid, Finley carried her body all the way from Caelid back to the Halig Tree, alone, through the most hostile territory in the lands between. The distance is enormous. The difficulty is unimaginable. And Finley did this not as a soldier following orders, but as an individual choosing to honour her commitment to someone who could not protect herself. Finley does not appear as a boss. She is never fought. She is referenced only in item descriptions and in the placement of her armour near Malenia's arena, evidence of where she finally lay down after completing the journey. Her story is told entirely in negative space, the armour left behind, the item description, the implicit question of how much was required to make it there. Easter egg 128. The Godfrey Shade's Lion Partner. The Serosh figure who sits on Godfrey's back throughout the entire game until the moment he removes it in the fight is so integrated into Godfrey's silhouette that many players do not initially register it as a separate entity. Serosh is described as the embodiment of Godfrey's suppressed battle instinct, the part of him that was tamed in service of civilization. Whether Serosh is a spirit, a construct, a projection of Godfrey's own divided nature, or a genuine external entity placed on him by Marika, is debated in the lore community. What is clear is that Godfrey voluntarily accepted Serosh's presence, which means that on some level, he wanted or needed the restraint that Serosh provided. He was aware that his instincts were a liability in the role he had been given. He chose to have them managed. The removal of Serosh before the Huaralu phase is not just a combat mechanic reveal, it is Godfrey choosing at the end to be what he actually is, rather than what he was shaped to be. Easter egg 129. The Elden Ring's physical form and what shattered it. Marika shattered the Elden Ring, and the how of this is connected to what the Elden Ring actually is. The Elden Ring is not just a symbol or a magical artifact. It is described as the law of the world, the organizing principle that defines how reality functions in the lands between. Shattering it did not just break a magical object, it broke the law. The lands between's entire social, ecological, and metaphysical structure is built on the ring's integrity. When Marika shattered it, she did not just create a power vacuum for the demigods to fight over. she dismantled the fundamental framework of reality that had made everything else possible. The war and the chaos that followed the shattering is not just political chaos. It is what reality looks like when its organizing principle is removed. The game you play takes place in a world whose basic physics have been broken, and almost everything you encounter is the result of that breakage in one way or another. Easter egg 130. Why Marika shattered the Elden Ring? This question is never definitively answered in the base game, and it is one of the most discussed topics in the lore community. Several possible readings exist. One is that Marika shattered the ring out of grief after Godwyn's death on the night of the Black Knives. She had lost her first and most beloved son, and responded by destroying the divine system she had built. Another reading is that the shattering was deliberate and planned, an act of cosmic rebellion or redirection rather than emotional reaction, consistent with the idea that Marika had always been building toward an alternative future for the lands between, and the shattering was the first step. A third reading combines these, suggesting that the grief was real, but that Marika used it as the emotional energy to do something she had already been contemplating. The shattering is the game's central mystery, and the game's position is that it was an act with consequences too large to be fully understood. Easter egg 131. The Elden Beast as a cage for the Rune of Death. When the Elden Beast is the vessel of the Elden Ring, and when the Elden Ring once contained the Rune of Death before Marika had it removed, the question arises of what the Elden Beast's relationship is to death. If the ring once held death, and has since had death removed from it, the Elden Beast carries a ring with a hole in it, a cosmological framework missing one of its fundamental components. This might explain the Elden Beast's behaviour during the fight, which includes attempts to seal the player, to contain and restrict, rather than simply to destroy. The Elden Beast may be reacting to the presence of the Rune of Death's energy, released by Malekith's death, as a contamination of the system it carries. It is trying to maintain integrity of the ring it embodies in a world where the ring has been damaged and its missing piece has been reintroduced to the world's substance. Easter egg 132. Ranni's doll body and her choice. Ranni cut her soul free from her body on the night of the Black Knives, killing her own body along with Godwyn's soul, and subsequently inhabited a small doll body that you encounter her in throughout her questline. This choice to leave the body entirely and exist as a soul in a doll is a radical act of self-determination. Ranni was designated a role by the Two Fingers, a destiny within the Greater Will's plan, and she rejected it by removing herself from the physical form through which that destiny would have been enacted. Her doll body is a compromise, a way to exist and act in the world without being the thing she was made to be. When Ranni's questline concludes and she takes the Elden Ring to the stars to begin her own age, she does so from this diminished, borrowed body, which is simultaneously the most and least powerful thing about her. She has remade everything using a form that was never really hers. Easter egg 133. Shah of the Stars and Noxtella. Noxtella, the eternal city of the stars, is one of the two major underground cities, and it is explicitly described as a place where the Nox people gazed at stars they could not see. They built representations of the night sky underground because the Greater Will had buried them away from the actual sky as punishment. The entire city is a recreation of the sky above, a monument to the stars the Nox were denied access to. Ranni's questline takes you through Noxtella, which is appropriate because Ranni's project is about reclaiming the stars and redirecting their influence. Walking through a city built as a monument to stars by people who were denied them, on the way to redirecting the stars' cosmological significance, is a journey whose path is not accidental. The game is placing you in the context of denial and longing before you go to do the thing that addresses it. Easter egg 134. Astal's arena and what it tells you. Before you reach the first Astal, you walk through the Lake of Rot. The Lake of Rot is exactly what it sounds like, a vast underground body of scarlet rot fluid that deals constant damage. The path from the Lake of Rot to Astal's arena is the path from one alien contamination to another. Both the Rot and Astal are external intrusions into the world, things that do not belong to the lands between's original structure. The juxtaposition of the Lake of Rot with Astal's void creature presence is the game placing its two most categorically alien elements in the same area, as if to suggest that the underground, removed from the Erdtree's organising light, has become a collection point for everything that is wrong with the world. The things that the Erdtree's grace cannot reach have been accumulating below, and the path to Astal walks you through all of them. Easter egg 135. The Godskin Apostle's Scythe and the Death God. The Godskin Apostle's weapon, the Godskin Peeler, is a double-bladed thrusting weapon, not a scythe despite the common assumption. But when the Apostle uses it in combat, the sweeping movements and the spinning attacks create the visual impression of a scythe in motion. This is likely deliberate. The scythe is the traditional weapon of death figure imagery across many real-world traditions, and the Godskin cult's association with the gloam-eyed queen, a death deity, means that this visual language connects them to the same iconographic tradition. The weapon is not actually a scythe, but it moves like one. The Apostle has been designed to invoke the aesthetic of death as a reaping force, the cutting down of gods the way grain is cut in harvest, even though the specific weapon that achieves this effect is technically something else. Easter egg 136. The Omen and their curse as a sign. Omens, the cursed beings born with horns and other bodily manifestations, are treated as abominations by the Golden Order and are generally disposed of at birth or confined to the sewers beneath the capital. The word omen is significant. An omen is not a curse in itself. An omen is a sign, a portent of something to come. The omens as a race are read by the Golden Order as signs of ill fortune, harbingers of something bad. But signs can be interpreted in multiple ways. One reading of the omens is that they are not portents of evil, but portents of change, beings whose bodily difference from the norm signals that the order those norms enforce is unstable or incomplete. They are the cracks in the system made flesh. Morgoth, being the most powerful defender of the system that produced him by condemning his existence, is the game's purest expression of this irony. He embodies the crack and works to paper over it. Easter egg 137. Mohg's Opera and the Blood Lake. The Mogwyn Palace is one of the most visually distinctive environments in the game, a pink and red underground space beneath a bloody sky, soaked in blood and populated by the worshippers of the formless mother. Mohg has constructed an entire aesthetic, a palace, a court, an environment that reflects his theological devotion. The blood lake surrounding Miquella's cocoon is not incidental decor. It is a ritual space, a prepared environment for the awakening that Mohg believes is coming. He has spent an unknown amount of time building this, surrounded by followers who have embraced the formless mother's blood theology, waiting for Miquella to wake up and recognize him as a worthy consort and partner in a new divine age. The delusion in this plan, the fact that Miquella has been actively sleeping, not awakening, and that the unalloyed gold needle can be used to sever even the connection Mohg is depending on, is the gap between the elaborate stage he has set and the actual outcome. He built an entire world for a story that was never going to happen the way he imagined. Easter egg 138. The two fingers as bureaucrats of the divine. The two fingers, found at the Round Table, hold, and at various sites throughout the world, are the agents of the greater will, who interpret its wishes and provide guidance to the tarnished. They communicate only through gestures and are translated by the finger maidens who accompany them. The bureaucratic quality of this communication system is notable. The greater will's instructions do not arrive as divine speech or vision. They arrive as finger movements, interpreted by intermediaries, translated into language and then into action. This chain of interpretation introduces uncertainty and potential error at every step. Whether the two fingers are accurately conveying the greater will's intentions, whether the finger maidens are accurately translating the two fingers, whether the resulting guidance is actually what the greater will wants, none of this can be verified. The entire divine apparatus of the lands between runs on a communication system that could be wrong at any point. This may be an accident of the game's world building. It may also be the point. Easter egg 139. Sir Gideon and the death of the All-Knowing. When Gideon attacks you, he uses every major school of magic available in the game: sorcery, incantations, weapon skills. This is consistent with the idea that the All-Knowing does not specialize. But the fight's subtext, beyond the spectacular display of magical breadth, is that all of this knowledge ends here. When you kill Gideon, the most comprehensive living repository of information about the lands between is destroyed. Everything he knew, all the intelligence he gathered, all the connections he made between disparate pieces of lore, is lost. The All-Knowing dies and takes everything he knew with him. This is the game's statement about knowledge accumulated without a purpose. It can serve. Gideon was too knowledgeable to act and too knowledgeable to be anything else. He is the tragedy of infinite information without the wisdom to use it, and his death at the hands of the one piece of information he could not account for. The tarnished's persistence is appropriate. Easter egg 140, Malekith's final form and the Black Flame. When Malekith is revealed in the second phase of the fight against Gurranq, he fights with Black Flame in addition to the Black Blade's death energy. The Black Flame is specifically associated with the Godskin tradition, with the Gloam-eyed Queen's power, and with the god-killing lineage. This is an unusual combination. Malekith uses a weapon and power associated with the Godskin cult to fulfill his role as guardian of the Rune of Death. Whether this reflects a connection between Malekith and the Gloam-eyed Queen that predates the Golden Order's suppression of her tradition, or whether Malekith simply acquired or was given this power as part of his guardian function, is not clearly established. One reading is that the Rune of Death and the Black Flame tradition are more closely related than the game's surface structure suggests, both being aspects of death as a divine force, and Malekith, as guardian of death, naturally channels both. Easter egg 141. The giant in Farum Azula. Farum Azula contains architectural remnants of a civilization that existed before the current age, and among the entities found, there are ancient dragons and a persistent storm, but there are also enormous stone figures in the architecture, carvings of beings that resemble the fire giants, built into the walls and supports of the structure. This is unusual because Farum Azula, as a location associated with Malekith and with ancient draconic culture, does not obviously have a connection to the giant civilization. One reading is that Farum Azula predates even the distinction between giant civilization and draconic civilization, existing from an era when these categories were less separate than they would later become. The giant-like carvings in the architecture might represent beings that were ancestral to both the giants and the dragons as we encounter them, an era before differentiation into the specific forms these creatures took. The temporal anomaly that defines Farum Azula makes this kind of historical layering particularly complex to pass. Easter egg 142. The Albinaurics and Haligtree's purpose. The Albinaurics are a constructed race created by alchemists using techniques that have never been fully explained in-game. They are humanoid but pallid, clearly artificial, and they are excluded from the Golden Order's grace because they were made rather than born. The Haligtree that Michaela built was specifically intended to provide a grace-like blessing for Albinaurics and misbegotten, beings the Erdtree's institution excluded. This is one of Miquella's most significant acts, the attempt to build a cosmological institution capable of including everyone, the existing one rejected. The Albinoric village and the related locations show a community of beings who have found shelter in Miquella's project, and the bosses associated with the Haligtree's defense, including Loretta, are defending this community as much as they are defending the location. When you fight through the Haligtree and reach Millennia, you are fighting through the last refuge of the Lands Between's excluded populations. Easter egg 143. The Cleanrot Knight Armor's visual design. The Cleanrot Knight Armor design combines elements of traditional plate armor with plant-like motifs, specifically golden stems and floral patterns that echo the aesthetic of the Erdtree but in a more organic and less institutional form. This design language suggests that the Haligtree's tradition was deliberately building something that referenced the Erdtree's aesthetics while distinguishing itself from them. The Cleanrot Knights look like Erdtree adjacent knights, but with a different character, less rigid, more natural, the difference between a cultivated tree and a wild one. Millennia's own armor, the Millennia set, has the same quality, golden but organic, power expressed through natural form rather than divine decree. The visual vocabulary of the Haligtree's defenders is the visual vocabulary of an alternative to the existing order, using the same materials but arranged differently. Easter egg 144. The Tree Sentinel with the Dragon Crest Shield. A specific Tree Sentinel variant, the Draconic Tree Sentinel, is found in specific locations and wields a shield bearing a dragon crest. This Sentinel is significantly more powerful than the standard version and fights with lightning in addition to its standard moveset. The dragon imagery on a Tree Sentinel shield is unusual because the Tree Sentinels are specifically Erdtree associated, and the dragon tradition exists somewhat separately from the Erdtree's framework. The Draconic Tree Sentinel might represent a historical period when the Dragon Pact was more formally incorporated into the Erdtree's military structure, when the two traditions overlapped in a way that produced hybrid warriors. The lightning attacks of the Draconic Sentinel mirror the ancient dragon lightning tradition, suggesting that whoever designed this specific class of Sentinel incorporated draconic power through a formal channel rather than the more informal dragon communion system. Easter egg 145. What the Lands Between looked like before the Erdtree. This is a question the game answers very partially, and through implication rather than statement. The Crucible era, the era of ancient dragons, the traditions of the Nox and the Giants, all of these offer glimpses of a world that predated the Erdtree's specific ordering of reality. What those glimpses suggest is a world where the lines between species were more porous, where death and life cycled through each other more openly, where power was more distributed and its sources more various. The Erdtree's establishment represents a consolidation of cosmological authority, a narrowing of the possibilities rather than an expansion of them. Many of the game's bosses, in their specific cultural and historical contexts, are survivors of that earlier world, and fighting them is in a sense fighting the remnants of what the world was before the current system imposed itself. The game does not say this older world was better, it says it was different and that the transition was not without cost. Easter egg 146. The Natural Born of the Void. Astel and the Borealis comparison. Borealis, the freezing fog, is a dragon found in the mountaintops of the Giants, an ancient dragon whose breath creates a dense freezing fog rather than fire. The comparison between Borealis and Astel is instructive because both are environmental threats, creatures whose primary characteristic is the environmental hazard they create, rather than specific intentional attacks. Borealis creates a fog that obscures everything and deals continuous cold damage. Astel creates gravitational fields and voidic energy. Both exist in the margins of the world, in extreme environments, doing something the world's inhabitants cannot easily respond to. The comparison suggests that the lands between has always contained entities that threaten it through environmental transformation rather than direct aggression, and that some of these entities predate the shattering specific chaos. Borealis has been in those mountains for a very long time. Easter egg 147. The Stone Digger Troll's missing context. The Stone Digger Trolls found in mining tunnels are almost certainly aware that they are being used for labour. Trolls in the lands between are not unintelligent beings, at least not categorically so. The Crucible Knight bosses require troll-scale strength to have built the infrastructure they defend. The Stormveil Trolls are used as guards and shock troops, suggesting they follow basic commands. The Stone Digger Trolls' role as tunnel labourers implies that at some point someone organised them for this work, someone with enough authority and power to direct troll labour on a large scale. The mines are clearly not self-organised, someone planned them. The fact that the trolls now attack visitors suggests that the authority or social structure that kept them oriented has collapsed, and in the absence of instruction, they simply default to territorial defence of the spaces they have occupied, which are the tunnels they dug. Easter egg 148. The Full Moon and the Carian Royal Tradition. The Carian royals, Renala's family, built their power on a tradition of sorcery that drew specifically from celestial sources, particularly the moon. The Carian Manor and Caria Manor's boss, Royal Knight Loretta, are the Carian tradition's last active defence. The Carian Knight's armour is night-coloured, dark with silver and blue accents, visually referencing moonlight rather than sunlight. This is a deliberate aesthetic choice that positions the Carian tradition as complementary to but separate from the Golden Order's sun and gold aesthetic. The moon and the sun have been in a specific relationship in real-world cosmology for as long as human cultures have been observing them, and Elden Ring's use of this contrast is conscious. The Carian moonlight sorceries, which culminate in Renala's full moon attack and in the Moonlight Greatsword, represent an alternative source of power that is received and reflected rather than generated, a gentler and in some ways more mysterious tradition than the generating force of the Golden Order's golden light. Easter egg 149. The Moonveil Katana and its cultural context. The Moonveil Katana is found in a mining tunnel, and its item description places it within the context of swords made by Carian glintstone smithing. Katana aesthetics in a world modelled partly on European and partly on Middle Eastern and partly on Japanese cultural materials is an interesting choice, and the Moonveil specifically, as a Carian weapon, suggests that the Carian tradition had its own smith culture, drawing from different material influences than the Western armoured Golden Order tradition. The Carian aesthetic, when assembled across all its associated items and locations, is slightly more Eastern influenced than the rest of the game's dominant aesthetic. Whether this is a deliberate cultural commentary or simply a design choice for variety is not clear, but the Moonveil, as a Carian katana, places it within a tradition that is already visually and aesthetically distinct from the Golden Order's arming swords and greatswords. Easter egg 150. What Miquella actually is. Miquella is described in various places as the most gifted of the demigods, the one most likely to transcend the limitations of divine inheritance. He is also described as an Empyrean, a being who could potentially become a new god, to replace or supplant a current one. His project, the Haligtree and the Unalloyed Gold tradition, is fundamentally about creating a cosmological system that operates outside the greater will's authority